Hi everyone, we hope you're doing well. We're hanging in there though honestly, we haven't been getting much sleep lately. Today, we want to answer a question we get a lot: how do we publish our audiobooks? First, we post most audiobooks on Patreon as paid content. They stay paid for a few months. After that, they become free to listen to on Patreon forever. A few weeks later, we post them on other places like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, X. Lately, things have been a bit slow in terms of new members. So we'd love your help. Please share our site with your friends or in places like Facebook groups, Twitter, X, Discord, Reddit, or novel forums. Even one share can really help us grow. Thanks so much for your support. Chapter 1, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 1. Once, there was a glorious kingdom established among the heavens. In the central square of Billabong, a bard stood serenely in front of the eternal winter monument, playing and singing in a calm, lilting voice. From that kingdom came a crowned heir, tasked with seeking out the Genesis Pearl from the kingdom of darkness. The bard's androgynous features, gentle voice, and verdant clothing gave an immediate impression. This is what a bard should look like. The first crowned heir began her journey of seeking the pearl. A crowd had gathered, listening intently to the story he wove. Among them were members of the Golden Theater, and even its most celebrated actress, the renowned Tamila, who stood raptly among the listeners. But she was deceived, and the memory of her noble origins faded. As his harp's melody shifted from light to foreboding, the listeners couldn't help but furrow their brows, feeling the weight of his words. Yet, as in every hero's tale, a turning point loomed. She now believed that she was the queen of the kingdom of darkness. The young bard strummed his instrument again, speaking as if he were a witness to the events he recounted. But take heart, a second crowned heir had already taken up the path where the first had stumbled. His voice held an enchanting quality, conjuring an image of a young prince, crowned but still green. This is the story of your journey, of your tale to be told. Until the music faded. The applause that followed was thunderous. Though the tale of the second heir remained unfinished, leaving some curiosity in the air, no one heckled him for it. And the bard, surrounded by the crowd, let go of his previous solemn expression and flashed a playful, roguish grin. With a flourish, he doffed his hat like a street performer, boldly beginning to request donations. Never underestimate this skill. Plenty of people out there would watch without paying, some even staying to ramble on at length. Now to elegantly and politely secure payment? That's an art. Of course, there's something even more pressing: without money, you go hungry. He, or rather, they, knew this all too well. When he first arrived here, he didn't have the popularity he did now. He didn't know where he could perform or even manage the chaos of memories in his head, which felt like a tangled ball of yarn clawed apart by a cat. Thankfully, in every memory he held, there was a saying: since you've come, take it as it comes. This approach seemed embedded deep within him, helping him overcome initial discomfort and quickly tapping into his natural talents. With his skyward harp always at his side, he managed to scrape by, singing for his meals and sipping small sips of wine when he could. But of course, his aspirations stretched beyond just that. As he sifted through his memories, Vinny gradually pieced together his current situation. He was on the planet Jarilovi, more precisely. In the last bastion of human survival, Billabong. Depositing his earnings into his hat, he pressed it back on his head, carefree, as if he had no worry about the coin slipping out. Politely declining a warm invitation from a lady at the theater house, Vinny, as light as the wind, danced through the crowd. He had another show to attend, and he couldn't afford to be late. He zigzagged through the throng, pausing here and there, even lingering by the toy shops that fascinated children. After picking up a few snacks, he reluctantly left, casually glancing back. Once he'd shaken off the Silvermane guards shadowing him, Vinny slipped down a small, unremarkable alleyway behind the Gata Grand Hotel. Counting 3 bricks down from the top and 2 to the left beside a row of trash cans, he gave 3 gentle knocks. The bricks shifted inward, revealing a narrow slit just big enough to peek through. Ahem, ahem. Good friend, good friend. Tell me, where's Mr. Magic Puss hiding? He asked in a friendly, almost eager tone, like a young wizard visiting Diagon Alley for the first time. To an ordinary observer, this scene would seem ridiculous. But the next moment, his answer came. My dear buddy, Magic Puss is right here. A man poked his head out from under a garbage lid, his mischievous eyes and roguish grin leaving no doubt he was up to no good. Eh? Why are you over there? Whoa. The smell you're giving off is intense. The moment Venti's gaze met his, he was hit by a pungent odor, and he took a quick step back, grimacing. Hearing his reaction, the blue-haired man finally sniffed his collar, giving an awkward smile. Ah, yeah, well, it's been a rough day. When I was making a deal, I bumped into the guards. They chased me for ages, and I had to improvise. Pardon me. Once Vidi's nose adjusted a bit, he shook his head and replied with a touch of exasperation. So, you really do have a special talent for this shady business, don't you? Hee hee, business is business, no shame in it. Sampo clambered out of the trash can and pulled out a comb from who knows where, slicking his bangs back with a touch of flair. He spritzed himself with cologne from some dubious source, flashing a smile. Unlike you, dear Venti, I'm not blessed with a natural talent for singing. Sure, I've got the basics down, but to get popular like a band, I'd have to work at it for years. With a wink, he added, hey, by the way, I have a little money-making idea. How about forming a new band with Miss Seela? We could call it Kasoka Band. Trendy, fun, bound to be a hit. And, as the brains behind the idea, all I'd need is a small cut of the ticket sales. What do you say? Genius, right? Hey. Should I call you persistent, or say you've got a thief's ambition? Vidi chuckled, watching him with amusement. If you were somewhere where your talents could really flourish, maybe you'd be able to assess the value of the whole planet. Nah, just joking around. At my age, making a decent living is as much as I hope for. Sampo waved it off, sensing Vidi's polite refusal in his tone, and didn't press the matter. Instead, he set about moving the trash cans he'd been hiding behind, revealing a section of rusted metal sheeting which he pried open with a few twists. Venti looked on, curious. We're not taking the same route as the last time? There might be monsters from the fragmentum along the last route. I'll need a few days to reevaluate it. Sampo wore a troubled expression but didn't elaborate further. With a few more pulls and grunts, he yanked away the rusted sheet and clambered down into a hidden passage. The narrow entrance fit Venti perfectly, though it was a tight squeeze for Sampo. As they descended, the fresh, open air faded, replaced by the thick scent of rust and machine oil. They walked along some massive piping, glancing down occasionally at pools of leaking Harut sap. In the distance, heavy machinery rumbled, filling the silence with a dull roar. Though the path was dim and claustrophobic, Sampo and Venti, both of whom were far from taciturn, quickly filled the air with chatter, making the atmosphere feel more like a casual outing. Listen, I'm not nagging, but with your looks and your talent, Venti, you're probably just a registration away from becoming a Billabong citizen. So, why keep slipping down to the underworld? Sampo asked, shaking his head like an exasperated older brother. In response, Venti gave a sly smile and answered playfully. Ah, but there's still a world of people down here, waiting for me to sing of the changing seasons, to celebrate the beauty of all things. Chapter 2, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 2, Venti was Venti, and yet he wasn't. Before arriving here, he had another name and an ordinary background. He wasn't particularly knowledgeable about the god Barbados, but he could speak a little on the subject and was even fortunate enough to receive a gift from him, granting him a bit of self-defense. He knew a few things about his current planet, Jaralovi, and the cosmic journey it represented. The timeline was supposed to be a few years before the arrival of the Astral Express, though he wasn't quite sure of the exact date. As for why he was now reduced to making a living by performing, for one, he currently lacked the power he remembered from his memories, the strength to dispel blizzards, split mountains, and transform harsh lands into places where wind and honey flowed. Secondly, the tyrant seated in the Guardian's position was not the type to welcome an unpredictable variable like him with open arms. So, for now, he had to bide his time and slowly gather strength. It wasn't like he was slacking, after all, these days, apart from singing to keep himself fed, he was busy organizing his memories. The memories of Barbados spanned millennia, and even though not all of them were unlocked, inheriting them in an orderly way was a major challenge. Compared to Barbados' lifetime, his own previous life might not have been long enough to fill a single nap. Thankfully, Venti could confirm he hadn't been completely assimilated into being Barbados. While deeply influenced by him, the main reason he took this name was that his own past was nothing worth mentioning. Thus, with the deity's blessing, he took the name. Living more freely and spontaneously in another world seemed like a small, forgivable indulgence, didn't it? On a distant frontier planet lived a group of people. They were called the Season Watchers, and from birth, they guarded the long, endless seasons. Venti was telling a story at Natasha's clinic, a place often crowded with the injured and filled with cries of pain, not always the right setting for cheerful songs. So sometimes, he told stories instead of singing. And for the children, as long as there were snacks and a good story, they could sit still for quite a while. Venti, why did they watch the seasons? Are there other seasons besides winter? Of course there are, Lord Hook of the Dark. Venti recognized the child who asked. Her adorable face bore crumbs from the snacks she'd eaten, and her oversized dust-proof winter hat made her look a bit bulky. She was the leader of a local group called the Moles, a free spirit who saw life as a series of adventures. But interrupting someone's story wasn't exactly polite. Once she'd been shushed by the other children, who stuffed her mouth with roasted gecko tails, Venti continued. The planet was unique. 1 year there equaled 60 years on Jarilo. 15 years of spring, 15 years of summer, 15 of autumn, and 15 of winter. Just hearing the description, the children's jaws dropped in unison with a collective wow. Though they had little concept of time or the ancient seasonal words, their imaginations filled in the gaps. People were born into these seemingly stagnant seasons. They grew from babies to young girls, having never witnessed the changing of seasons, only hearing the tales from their elders of what it was like to see the world transformed. They said that in spring, endless seas of honey flowed. In summer, the nights were alive with the songs of frogs and insects. In autumn, you could stand on your tiptoes and pluck fruits to fill your belly, and in winter, perhaps reaching the limits of their imaginations, the children began to look drowsy. Only Hook still gazed up with wide, sparkling eyes and burst out. In winter, you dig for Harut to stay warm, right? Venti blinked in surprise before replying, his tone thoughtful. Perhaps so, but I think, when the snow piles up in winter, that's the perfect time for a snowball fight. PFFT, that's so silly, Venti. What's so fun about snowball fights? Hook giggled at him. For these children, who'd never seen the sun, thick snow was never a welcome sight. In the lower district, which was constantly shrinking due to the fragmentum, people's living spaces were being squeezed ever smaller. The endless snow and the relentless machinery had been constants since they were born. Most importantly, any day they happened to find a frozen scavenger buried beneath the snow while playing with snowballs with their friends. Their desire to play would freeze over in an instant. The one lesson they learned from their families was never to sleep in the snow. Because if you fell asleep in the snow, you'd never wake up again. Just as Venti was pondering how to respond, someone came to his rescue. All right, Hook. It's time to go home. Any later, and Mr. Fizman will be worried. This was a woman named Natasha, one of the few doctors in the lower district, responsible for the young and old in this resource-scarce area. Because of her profession and her firm yet caring demeanor, Natasha commanded both respect and a little fear from most of the lower district residents. Even Hook, despite calling her an old witch in private, would obediently address her as Sister Natasha when face to face. As soon as Natasha spoke, Hook squeaked, startled, and backed away a few steps. 2 days earlier, she'd broken one of Natasha's test tubes by accident and got quite the scolding for it. So seeing her now was like a mole encountering an owl. Oh, now that you mention it, I'll leave you two alone. See you later, Sister Natasha, Venti. Hook scurried off with her 2 sidekicks, a boy named Julian and a girl named Alina. The other children, done with snacks and stories, also said their goodbyes to Venti and headed home. Though the upper city might still be deciding on what to have for afternoon tea, for the children of the lower district, it was already time to head home before dark. After watching them leave, Venti let out a small sigh of relief and looked gratefully at Natasha. She wore a gray-white headband, her green hair tied back in a neat ponytail. Her large, red and white medic's coat couldn't hide her curvaceous figure, and her serene smile and gentle demeanor were calming. However, her haggard expression, with bangs drooping over her forehead, made Venti straighten up a little. Long day, huh? Want some music to relax? How about an impromptu piece? Or maybe a nocturne? No need. Natasha shook her head with a tired but soft smile. If I listen to your nocturne now, I might just sleep through until morning. Oh, don't say that. You're a splendid dahlia in the prime of your bloom. Wouldn't it be a pity if you withered before your time? Venti plopped onto an empty bed, rummaged through his coat only to find he'd run out of snacks, then casually swung his slender, white-stockinged legs back and forth as he mumbled softly. Oh, how I miss the days when I had apples. Though curious about the occasional antiquated words Venti let slip, Natasha found herself more curious about his gender. But refusing to reply to his teasing wasn't an option. Venti might get lonely. So she tried responding in his own light-hearted, lyrical tone. To be remembered by a poet who sings of beauty, I suppose even if a long time passes, this flower might find itself in a story all its own. Natasha didn't claim to understand Venti fully, but like most people who met him, she'd heard his beautiful music and found herself compelled to listen. Of course, Venti wasn't a complete mystery. Everyone knew that Venti's gender was Venti, that Venti would wilt if left lonely, and that whenever he earned a bit of money, he would try to buy a drink, although he was often turned down for looking too young, or being short on funds. But if there was one thing people knew about him most, it was that, until the very end of his stories, you never knew if they'd have a happy ending or a tragic one. Chapter 3, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 3. After a warm exchange, Or rather, after Natasha's professional habits had run their course, she brought up business. Now, about that request from last time. Did you manage to gather any information, Betty? Oh, that esteemed dictator of ours. I'm afraid the situation is worse than you all anticipated. Because Venti frequently traveled between the upper and lower districts and often spent his earnings on the children in the lower district, Natasha, after assessing his trustworthiness, had asked him to gather insights into the Supreme Guardian's stance toward the lower district. After all, in the upper district, this was a topic people didn't dare discuss, and questioning civilians produced no results. Information was tightly controlled by those in power. Only Venti, with his bardic skills and his disarming, friendly demeanor, could easily slip into aristocratic gatherings hosted by the upper district. For him, it was like a fish in water, and it didn't require any particular risk. He just had to attend a few gatherings, and he'd eventually catch something. The nobles never suspected that a perpetually drunk bard, who lingered by the wine tables, was actually gathering information. Soon enough, after making himself familiar with the scene, Venti managed to glean a few secrets from an impressionable young noblewoman, devoted to the Supreme Guardian's every word and action. After briefly explaining his findings to Natasha, her expression grew even more troubled. Fiddling anxiously with her bangs, she murmured, "Doesn't the Supreme Guardian consider the people of the lower district to be her citizens, worthy of her protection?" "That's hard to say, but I think there might be a word for it in literature." Venti regarded her, his voice soft, slaves, or perhaps sacrifices. Both terms carried unpleasant connotations, sharp enough to provoke an instinctive rebuttal, just as it did in Natasha at that moment. She furrowed her brows, clearly dissatisfied with the description. "Mind your words, Venti. She may have issued the lockdown on the lower district, but she hasn't forced us to work for her, and there's no slave driver wielding a whip over us. But the fact is, since the lockdown was imposed, the lives and deaths of those in the lower district have been entirely in her hands, haven't they? Just like a slave master who could freely decide the fate of a slave used for ritual sacrifice. For the Supreme Guardian, if the upper and lower districts were placed on a balanced scale, she'd simply keep stripping the lower district of its weights, adding them to the upper district. This move allowed her to weave more lies, giving the upper district a false sense of security while avoiding potential unrest from behind. As for the quality of life in the lower district, the moment she deemed it dispensable, its fate was sealed. To her, any sacrifice was of value and meaningful if it served the higher goal. Even if it went against the original purpose of Billabong's creation. This unspoken understanding plunged Natasha into silence. When Billabong was first established, the city was structured like two interlocking discs, with the upper district handling administration and trade and the lower district supplying energy and resources. In theory, it was simply a division of responsibilities. But under the Supreme Guardian's governance, the relationship between the districts was anything but. In the upper district, people could dress in finery, walk clean streets free from even a hint of snow, and take public carriages to the administrative district to attend performances lauding the Supreme Guardian. They even enjoyed basic safety. Though the Fragmentum's encroachment troubled them, they never feared for their lives. The Silvermane Guards kept them physically safe, while the Supreme Guardian provided them with spiritual comfort. Living under her guidance, they could remain blissfully ignorant until death. The lower district, however, painted a vastly different picture. Due to past industrial planning, the lower district had more large-scale mining equipment than it did proper residential areas. The underground environment couldn't support self-sustenance. Most plants and animals were inedible. Those who consumed them would experience rapid organ failure, a death sentence in a district with scarce medical resources. As such, people had to gather large quantities of Harut to send up through the connected pipeline to the upper district, in exchange for essential supplies. It might sound different from before, but in truth, it wasn't. First, a mobilization order transferred the Silvermane Guards to the so-called front lines. 10 years had passed, and there were no signs of them returning. During that time, the Supreme Guardian had completely sealed off the lower district, leaving its people defenseless and trapped, like lambs to the slaughter. The situation in the lower district became a frog in boiling water. First, local collapses, then the loss of mining areas, with former homes turning into monster-infested wastelands. Despite the emergence of local resistance groups like Wildfire and the defensive front established by the mechanical Svarog, the encroachment of the Fragmentum couldn't be stopped. With insufficient resources, people went hungry, becoming drifters or even forming gangs to rob each other. The streets were cloaked in deathly silence, as dark as the eternal night. Looking up, they saw no sun, only the black, oppressive gear structures overhead. Devoid of safety or peace of mind, they still had to work. To dig up Harut, send it to the upper district, and make the lower district's contribution in line with the spirit of Billabong. Mobilization orders printed before the lockdown were still visible in the streets of Rivet Town, reminding people of their duty. Now, they saw fewer supplies coming down, rations that once sustained a family now barely enough to stave off hunger for one person. Anger gave way to numbness as they watched each other with weary eyes. Imagine having to stretch a loaf of bread over a week. Anyone who has suffered hunger knows that feeling never fades. To survive, the people of the lower district had no choice but to meet the upper district's growing demand for Harut. That meant that from the day of the lockdown, anyone wanting to live had no choice but to work in the mines, trading Harut for meager rations. And even if the immediate needs were met, the prolonged exposure to Harut, crystal dust, and noise still led to severe, chronic miners' illnesses. With the lockdown in effect, most people dared not seek medical treatment, and many suffered in silence. For the Supreme Guardian, were the people of the lower district, stripped of their freedom and bound to the mines, anything but slaves? She didn't even have to worry about rebellion. The strict information control and ancient authoritarian rule made every word from the Supreme Guardian seem like divine edict. People wouldn't think they were being deceived. They'd merely blame the lower district residents for being lazy and divisive, ignoring the greater good at a time of humanity's survival crisis. Eventually, with the upper district's stores of Harut sustaining them through the worst days, the lower district would fall into chaos, and starvation would consume those without reserves. The rebellion would end in tragedy, and the survivors would return to the Supreme Guardian's embrace. With the population thinned, the remaining resources would last longer, and her rule would face no more threats. The most ironic part? The Supreme Guardian herself had once been the star of the lower district. Born and raised here, she'd gone to study in the upper district, eventually earning glory, only to forget her roots. Perhaps this was why Venti openly despised her, and why he believed the lower district lacked a spark to ignite change. But for now, Wildfire likely wouldn't act so decisively. People who lacked opportunity or a wind of hope were more likely to settle for stability than to dream of more. Even Venti couldn't urge them to risk their lives for freedom. Even among those with intense resentment toward the Supreme Guardian, all it would take was a spark to set them ablaze, driving them to burn down everything above them. But doing so would only lead to yet another chaotic, meaningless struggle between humans. Even if they won, the people of the lower district would merely replace the upper district's residents. But what had the people in the upper district truly done wrong? They, too, were sheep led to the slaughter. Even if they hanged the tyrant, they would remain prisoners trapped within these colossal walls. Billabong would still face the same inescapable doom, its destruction merely hastened. To solve the crisis facing this planet, they had to deal with the root cause of the disaster, the stellar in itself. So Venti had a bold idea. In the past, Barbado's power as a god didn't solely come from his gnosis, he also had power unique to himself. But over the eons, that power had faded, like a whisper on the wind. If he could possess a Stellarin as his gnosis, perhaps he could reclaim his former strength, or even surpass it. Then, for him, scattering the blizzards, splitting mountains, and saving the world might not be impossible. It might clash with his penchant for idling, but hey, even a bard could dream of becoming a hero once in a while. But before he could pursue such dreams, he'd need to find the allies who filled every hero's epic. And the best place to find them was, naturally, Wildfire. Chapter 4, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 4, Wildfire. What was Wildfire? In Natasha's words, they were the Silvermane guards of the lower district, though with a warmer touch. In other words, they were a grassroots, volunteer organization. Of course, considering the management challenges, it was clear that a group of mostly non-professional volunteers would struggle to maintain order across the entire lower district. Even now, Wildfire could only manage the area around Boulder Town and the nearby mines. This was already Wildfire's limit. With insufficient manpower, inadequate equipment, and unreachable goals, the organization couldn't grow any further. Realistically, even if Wildfire wanted to expand, they lacked the resources to support it. Even its core members couldn't completely forego their regular mining work. They had to descend into the mines to gather Harut to meet their basic living expenses and keep the organization afloat. The heroic partner Venti sought was none other than one of Wildfire's elite members. Yo, Seal. Here you are. A rare day off, and you're not at the clinic, flipping through those comics you stashed? Venti sat on a makeshift platform of crude machinery, looking down at the purple-haired girl below, who seemed lost in thought. Oh, you're back, Bard. Those comics were all borrowed by the kids ages ago. Seal turned to glance at him, a touch of gloom still in her gaze, not from the children but from some knot she couldn't untangle. Looking around, she found a foothold, swiftly climbed up to the platform, and gave Venti a little shove, making just enough room for herself as she grumbled. Hey, Bard. Tell me, do you really think there's any hope left for the lower district? Why so gloomy all of a sudden? Doesn't sound like the Seal I know. Venti could feel it. This spirited girl was caught in a period of confusion, though it had come a bit early in her life. But in the lower district, it didn't take much for a child to grow up. One trip into the mines, one scuffle for food, one unforgettable lesson. Less talking, more answering. You've been more places than I have, read more books too. Otherwise, I wouldn't even bother asking. With a proud little huff, Seal's words carried a note of genuine respect. She had met Venti by coincidence. One day after her patrol, she saw him being chased by a group of vagrants. Without a second thought, she stepped in to help. But before she could even turn around, he was gone. At the time, she'd chuckled, thinking he was a coward, flashy but useless, too scared to say thanks. Typical upper district behavior. But the next day, he showed up with a load of nice things as a protection fee. As a wildfire member, Seal took pride in keeping the peace in Boulder Town, so of course, she refused. But he kept showing up every so often with gifts, things rare in the lower district. Sometimes it was food, sometimes cloth, other times comic books. He often muttered that he ought to draw his own comics, putting his stories on paper to spread them around. But every time he saw the price of paper and pens, he'd give up on the idea. For a stingy guy, he was surprisingly generous with the kids. Over time, she got to know him, even giving him the nickname Bard. After all, she'd been to his performances before. Even Seal had to admit, though Venti was hopeless in a fight, any random vagrant could probably knock him out. His songs were better than those of the opera singer she'd once heard in the upper district with Oleg. He had the talent to thrive in the upper district, yet he often came down to help those in need. In her eyes, he was a rare breed, a scholar with a conscience. Sure, she hadn't been to much school and could barely write. But because she didn't understand, she held the unknown in reverence. Of course, there was little awe, but some respect. Only a tiny bit. Just about enough to fit between her thumb and forefinger. Is that so? To earn such trust, looks like I'll have to give you some real insight. Venti chuckled cheerfully. Oh? And what insight is that? Seal's curiosity was piqued. Well, as I see it, there are many factors that determine the lower district's future, but the biggest one has to be what caused things to turn out this way. The Supreme Guardian, huh? Seal's expression hardened, a flicker of hostility in her eyes. Not exactly. Or rather, not entirely. Venti shook his head and explained, she did decide to abandon the lower district, but the real culprit behind its desolation is the ceaselessly expanding fragmentum. But even if we know it's the fragmentum causing all this, what can we do? Seal frowned, clearly displeased. We can't exactly fight a phenomenon. All we can do is retaliate against the people behind it. Now that sounds like the Seal I know. Venti gave her a playful wink. We may not be able to wipe out an undesirable phenomenon, and we can certainly resent specific individuals. But we must remember, we're here to solve the problem, not just the people causing it. The two stared at each other for a moment before Seal looked away, a hint of frustration in her voice. So what are we supposed to do? To put it poetically, wait and hold on to hope. Before he could finish, Seal jumped up and clamped her arms around his neck, her face close to his but without a hint of affection. Her violet eyes sparkled with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Are you mocking me? Ah, I can't breathe. Let me go so I can explain. This is hardly ladylike. Venti's face scrunched up as he patted her arm. The girl was stronger than she looked. After glaring at him, Seal finally loosened her grip slightly, though she didn't let go completely. Venti had a habit of slipping away like a fish with buttered soles, running faster than she could catch him. If she wasn't careful, he'd escape again, and who knew if she'd ever manage to ask him this question again. Phew, I almost thought I'd never see the sun again. Freed, Venti took a deep breath, feigning a look of terror. Seal just huffed, irritated. If you don't explain yourself properly, you'll never see the Billabong sun. Whoa, no need to say something so terrifying with such a cute face. Venti didn't doubt Seal's determination. Concerned for his own safety, he got serious. If you're only aiming to reunite the lower and upper districts, that's doable. But the real question is, what future does a lower district want? You mean? I mean, even if you manage to reunite Billabong, allowing the kids to see a new sun and have full bellies. There are a lot of things to be done first. Like reactivating that long shutdown railway, reclaiming lost residential areas, and most importantly, Venti watched her expression shift as she tried to wrap her mind around his words, figuring out how to secure the right to negotiate as equals with the upper district. Or, to be precise, with that dictator. A right? Exactly. Not a right gained through force, but one that's freely given. Seeing Seal's blank expression, Venti softened his tone. The Supreme Guardian's authority wasn't taken by force, it was granted through the people's trust. They chose a leader they believed would lead them out of hardship. Just like Elisa Rand, the first Supreme Guardian, who shielded Billabong from the Great Cold, earning the people's admiration. If you can achieve that, then the lower district will have hope. But if you want to go even further, if you seek greater freedom, Seal, you need to be the one who brings about true miracles. Only then can you stand against the Fragmentum, and escape the fate they've ordered to end. Chapter 5, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 5. Clearly, his words struck a deep chord, so much so that even Venti was a bit surprised by the effect. Seal's previous confusion had vanished, replaced by a fierce, steely expression. Tell me, how do I create a miracle? You seem to trust me quite a bit. Aren't you worried I might just be spouting nonsense? Venti asked, feigning innocence. This made Seal release him, giving his chest a playful punch as she muttered, a bit embarrassed. Say what? Don't get all sentimental. Your talk has some sense to it, and you've done a lot to help everyone. She scratched her reddening cheek, her eyes darting. I trust you. Though, as you upper district people say, it's reluctant trust. Yes, reluctant. If it turns out you're just tricking me, I'll just have to knock some sense into you. I see. To be trusted by such an exceptional companion, well, that's both pressure and pride. Venti's warm gaze made the girl struggle to keep her composure, so she pouted, standing her ground. All right, enough flattery. For now, I'll follow your lead. When you're ready to get started, came to my tent, or have Oleg or Natasha let me know, and I'll come to you. No problem. I was just waiting for those words. With a light laugh, Venti reached out his hand for a high five. Seal found this sense of ritual intriguing. She'd thought only people in the lower district used simple gestures like this to welcome someone into the fold. But, considering Venti's personality, she wasn't all that surprised. With a renewed sense of camaraderie, she smacked his hand with an energetic, boyish enthusiasm. Without another word, she hoisted her scythe and headed back. She still had a patrol to get to. She'd learned that cool pose from a comic, perfect for parting scenes destined for reunions. Venti, of course, let her keep her flair, simply waving after her as he called out, together, let's make the winds blow through this stagnant season. Enough with the speeches. We're wildfire. We'll turn the upper district's injustice and those Fragmentum monsters into ashes. After retorting, Seal finally continued on her way. Venti watched her leave, but after only a few steps, she glanced back, accidentally locking eyes with him. Her ears went red as she scurried off, as though flustered or with something urgent to attend to. With a chuckle, Venti mused, what a charmingly stubborn, sweet girl, just like Dvelin. But, of course, no hero had only one companion. It was time to seek out the next. Rivet Town. Once home to many in the lower district, Rivet Town had been abandoned when the Silvermane guards withdrew, leaving the residents defenseless against the Fragmentum monsters and forcing them to flee. Now, only reckless fortune seekers ventured here. They were after supplies people hadn't managed to take and the broken automaton guards left behind. Though most automatons had been dismantled by monsters, some still contained operational parts. If one could find a complete logic core, it was a huge score, one of the most valuable components for automaton maintenance in the lower district. So whether searching for abandoned supplies or salvaging parts from robots, Rivet Town held an allure for scavengers and fortune hunters alike. Venti's next heroic companion held an important role among this community of scavengers. With calm and measured steps, he mapped the energy fluctuations around him, updating the scavenger route to ensure safety, all while searching for the elusive Crimson Rabbit. Updating the map was a small service for Natasha and Wildfire. In the lower district, a day without threats was rare. Constant battles with Fragmentum monsters or skirmishes with raiders always caused casualties. With minimal medical supplies, Wildfire sometimes had to risk trips to Rivet Town to scavenge for essentials. The map helped reduce the toll on their people. After a careful sweep of Rivet Town's outskirts, Venti moved toward the inner area, where the concentration of Fragmentum monsters would grow. While the outer areas had been thoroughly scavenged, the inner parts, heavily influenced by the Fragmentum and hastily abandoned, still held scattered resources. When the lockdown first began, the upper district had generously supplied Rivet Town, partly to save face and partly to pacify the people. Even 10 years later, remnants of supplies could still be found in hidden corners. The most perishable food was gone within the first 3 years. Those coming here now sought medical or durable mechanical supplies. This meant his chances of encountering the Crimson Rabbit were considerably high. And if luck failed him, he could still rely on his omnipresent winds to listen for any unusual sounds. With his skill in locating sounds, he not only evaded monsters but also found the ghostly scavenger herself, standing near a broken automaton in a narrow alley. She had hair as white as snow, wrapped in a warm, stylish red winter coat, and skin as smooth and pale as porcelain. Most striking were her delicate, bare feet on the cold stone floor. Despite her lack of footwear, she seemed unfazed by the chill, as though cold didn't touch her. Unlike most scavengers with their rough and dirty appearances, not a speck of dust marred her pristine figure. She looked as pure as a spirit in freshly fallen snow. She immediately heard Venti's intentionally audible footsteps and swiftly darted behind cover like a snow rabbit, a faint red glow flashing beneath her hood. Not every scavenger held goodwill toward their kind, and not every footstep was human. One needed constant vigilance in such a dangerous place, otherwise, it was only a matter of time before losing one's life. She had learned this brutal rule of survival early. Only after peeking through the cracks and recognizing Venti did she relax a little. Pulling back her hood, she revealed bright, ruby red eyes full of a hesitant yet yearning gaze. Good morning, or evening, little Clara. In the lower district, where there was no sunlight and people worked in mines, enduring noise and crystal dust, time held little meaning, and greetings were rare. After all, who knew if they'd survive until tomorrow? Few wasted time on formalities. But for this gentle, reserved girl, such a warm, family-like greeting brought her a sense of longing and contentment. Hello, Sister Venti. Visibly brightened, Clara stepped out from behind her cover, still shy. Venti found her pure and adorable, and as for any particular title she might use, that hardly mattered. His friend's happiness was worth more than any name. Good, good. Have you finished your work for today? I have something I'd like to talk to you about. Venti was straightforward. When speaking with Clara, excessive politeness could be misleading. Once, he'd asked if he might invite her to hear a song of the high heavens. Shy as she was, she'd wanted to accept but was convinced her duties came first. Then she worried about how to hear a song from the heavens. If Venti hadn't explained, she might still be puzzling over how to build a jetpack to fly up. So, with Clara, sincerity and warmth were best. And most important of all, treat her with the patience of family. Chapter 6, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 6. Sister Venti, do you need some parts to trade for wine? Clara found everything she needed today, so if you'd like. Clara took out her small backpack, filled with the fruits of her labor for the day. Her generosity left Venti feeling a bit guilty. The brief awkward silence must have come across as reluctance, prompting Clara, ever so considerate, to quickly add, "Oh, I didn't mean to offend you, Sister Venti. When you came and played music in the settlement, everyone was so happy. So, think of it as payment, maybe?" With resources so scarce, the people in the lower district understood the warmth of reciprocity well. In Mechanic Settlement, a community made mostly of scavengers, exchanges like these were a common practice. But still, Venti had no intention of accepting Clara's offer, so he gently shook his head. No. I'd never accept payment for a good deed. I perform for everyone because I want to. But the petite scavenger girl was nothing if not stubborn. When she fixed her ruby eyes on him, staring as unblinkingly as a snow rabbit, Venti could only raise his hands in surrender. Well, how about this, Clara? Why don't we talk as we walk back? This isn't exactly the best spot for a long chat. All right. I'll do whatever Sister Venti says. And so, the two of them made their way back out of Rivet Town. On the way, Clara continued to insist on giving him a small, high-value part, but Venti compromised by picking a nearly broken mechanical bird instead. Seeing this, Clara looked downcast, thinking she hadn't been much help to Venti after all. Hey now, there's no need to feel down. It may look a bit beat up, but with a little work, it'll be good as new. Besides, the mechanical bird has a story about the sky and freedom. It's a fitting trade. Venti ruffled her hair, soft and white as freshly fallen snow, and Clara's face softened into a smile, a little like a small animal basking in affection. She soon looked away shyly, staring at her feet and murmuring almost inaudibly, "Sister Venti is so thoughtful. It's like you're treating Clara as family." Well, I wouldn't mind having such a sweet little sister. Though Venti fancied himself a carefree spirit, blowing through life like the wind, ready to spread tales of beauty and joy wherever he went, he couldn't help but want to look after someone so pure-hearted as Clara. Clara, with her honest heart, took his words at face value, and her face flushed with excitement as she drew even closer to him. She admired Sister Venti and all that she stood for. Not only could she travel to many places and make countless friends, but the power of her music brought everyone together as a true family. That was the power of music, the power that belonged to Sister Venti alone. In Mechanic Settlement, it wasn't that no one sang, but that the boisterous, rap-like songs didn't quite resonate with an introverted girl like Clara. Still, she tried to like what others enjoyed. But Sister Venti, who brought comfort to their tense hearts, was someone she respected on a level akin to her respect for Mr. Svarog. And now, having been personally acknowledged as family by her, if there was ever anything Sister Venti needed, Clara would do her best to help. Sister Venti, you had something you wanted to tell me, right? Bravely, she asked the question, her small chest swelling with pride and purpose. Yes, but this is something that may require Mr. Svarog's approval. Venti stroked his chin thoughtfully. Sister Venti, you're not planning to sneak off with the settlement's medicinal alcohol, are you? Clara's question caught him off guard, her gaze filled with worry. Mr. Svarog wouldn't allow that. He said drinking like that could be very harmful to the body. No, that's not it, but... Do I really give off that kind of impression? Venti thought he'd reined in his drinking habits considerably since his days as Barbados, when he'd often stagger home drunk in Mondstadt. Quality wines were scarce here in Billabong, and the watered-down, inferior liquor couldn't hold a candle to the fruit wines in his memories. Compared to Barbados' wild days, he'd been downright restrained here. People who knew him might even exclaim, "Who are you, and what have you done with our bard?" So he really didn't expect Clara to think of him as some drunken bard. Right? But last time, when you were performing in the settlement, you kept chugging that drink while singing and then you started, flowers, birds, wind, and moon and all that. Both Venti and Clara blushed at the mention of the incident. Now, don't get the wrong idea, it wasn't some raucous outdoor bender. With Billabong's cold, a party like that would likely freeze them solid first. Clara's flowers, birds, wind, and moon comment was more reminiscent of a memorable performance by a certain water goddess named Aqua in Venti's memories. Though his antics couldn't compare to her human fountain display, it was still quite the spectacle for the lower district residents, who rarely had access to such entertainment. So, if Clara thought he wanted to sneak alcohol to loosen up for his performances, well, maybe that wasn't too surprising. Ahem. Venti coughed and tried to look serious, contemplating a smooth excuse when he noticed Clara's concerned gaze and ended up blurting, "Fine, fine. I promise I won't do that again." Clara shyly lowered her head, her pale fingers nervously entwining as she murmured softly, "You don't have to promise Clara anything. Mr. Svarog just said you shouldn't drink too much, that's all." After all, in Billabong's perpetual chill, a little alcohol was invaluable for keeping travelers warm. But seeing that Clara was still young, Venti decided to steer the conversation away from alcohol and back to the matter at hand. "Well, what I wanted to discuss with you actually concerns everyone in the lower district." As he brought this up, his demeanor shifted from relaxed to serious. Clara noticed the change and instinctively straightened up, her face tense. "You're aware of the increasing fragmentum spread in the lower district, right? Mr. Svarog has told Clara about it. Then, what is Mr. Svarog planning to do?" Chapter 7, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 7. Hearing Venti bring up this issue, Clara's expression turned somber. Mr. Svarog insists on following his calculations, so he won't agree to open the transport channels. He says that doing so would only lead to a sudden flood of homeless people from the lower district overwhelming the upper district, accelerating Billabong's decline. It was, indeed, a painful reality. When a stable community suddenly gets a massive influx of outsiders encroaching on their limited space, there's bound to be pushback and hostility. Even though they were technically fellow citizens, the decade of information lockdown and physical separation had made this social bond more tenuous. The upper district wasn't exactly a comfortable haven either. Plenty of displaced people were still camped outside Glippeth Fort, waiting endlessly for the Supreme Guardian's intervention. The people of the lower district only wanted to find peace and safety. It wasn't just a survival instinct, it was a basic hope. But, once again, the chance of the upper district accepting them was slim. Beyond the fragmentum's constant encroachment shrinking the area where people could live, there was also the question of what those in power would do. At best, the Silvermane Guards might send the stowaways back down, avoiding a municipal crisis. This could only worsen the divide between the upper and lower districts. Imagine, people, fueled by hope, reach the so-called Glippeth Fort only to find that their once protective bastion holds no salvation, only deeper despair. What would they do then? The Silvermane Guards, who were supposed to protect them, would become prison guards, with them cast as fugitives breaking free. These citizens, having been abandoned once by the Supreme Guardian, would be judged by her own hand as rebels. No one would accept such a reversal, nor the idea of once protective forces now wielded with brutal, authoritarian power. Rumors, chaos, and internal strife would become the norm. As the supposed instigators, the lower district would likely face severe backlash from the upper district. For the already fragile lower district, this would be a devastating blow. And anything that could threaten the survival of the lower district would be on Mr. Svarog's list of things to stop. If he remained steadfast, allowing only passage in and not out, then even if Wildfire wanted to help, they'd be helpless without resources. Although Venti disliked assuming the worst of others and preferred not to burden Clara with such worries. For the sake of the lower district's future, and for the many challenges Clara would eventually face as a key figure, she couldn't avoid these issues forever. The reason was simple: while Clara might not be the head of Mechanic Settlement, the largest robot force in the lower district, her views often aligned with Svarog's goals. This meant Clara's stance would heavily influence Mr. Svarog's own views. But persuading a robot whose logic ran on the survival of the lower district would take more than Clara's support alone. Venti's real challenge lay in convincing Svarog to abandon his calculated predictions and believe in him as a wind of hope and change. Too abstract a concept wouldn't convince a robot. Unless Venti could make Svarog experience this feeling, maybe by directly transmitting his data, he'd have to go through Clara. But he was Venti, not Shubai or Rick. Those options wouldn't work for him. Stories often had scenes where the power of emotions conquers all, and while it was touching, if he took that route, especially with an innocent soul like Clara looking on, any hero bold enough to think that way should go straight to jail. The hardest part of getting to see Mr. Svarog was, surprisingly, actually quite easy. All he had to do was shout at the security robot at the gate, "Help me, Clara." Problem solved. Still, even if he managed to get an audience, he wasn't sure how he'd sway Svarog. The true challenge was in quantity, not just change. Change was an essential truth of the world. Even the Aeons were not immune. They felt emotions, journeyed along their destinies, and could fall in the silent void of space. Convincing Svarog he was the spark of change in the lower district was simple. But convincing him that this change could bring about meaningful progress, well, that would take more than poetry. Luckily, he had an idea. Venti lightly touched the vision at his waist, clear and jade-like, which could transform into his lyre, skyward harp. Not only could it shift between these forms, but it could also become a bow, perfectly complementing his forest ranger look. This skyward harp was what let Venti earn his living as a bard and occasionally pick off fragmentum monsters like moving targets. Wealthy people had even offered him prices high enough to let him live a life of leisure, lazy enough to last him until a real savior descended upon Billabong. Yet he never considered selling it. This lyre had been with him far too long to part with. To most, it was merely a shiny trinket, destined to gather dust. No one asked him its price again, sparing Venti the trouble of making excuses. This was what sparked his plan. Although Skyward Harp might only be a rare instrument here in Billabong, worth noting but not enough to make people covet it. Rumor had it that Billabong had some artifacts, though records of them were buried in the Billabong Historical Museum, which had closed for renovation long ago. Among them, the most famous relic had to be the first Supreme Guardian's lance. Legend held that Elisa Rand, Billabong's first Supreme Guardian, wielded this lance to lead the people in a 30-year war of defense against the Legion of Destruction. Until, the year before the completion era, Billabong was finally finished. With the coming of the interstellar cold front, triggered by an unstable stellaron, the planet Jarilovi entered an ice age. If not for Elisa Rand's courage, using the lance to light the flame of preservation, Billabong might never have survived the cold front. There would be no upper or lower district, no last bastion of humanity. Only a frozen dead world and the ruins of the forgotten. Unfortunately, after Elisa Rand passed, no one could ignite the lance's flame again. Its whereabouts were shrouded in mystery. Some said the Supreme Guardian kept it close, others that it lay gathering dust in the museum's collection. Still others believed it had rusted into scrap, standing on Everwinter Ridge. Whatever the case, to most Billabong citizens, it was a relic symbolizing survival and preservation. As to why it was classified as a rare item, they didn't care to investigate. It would serve well enough to bolster the credibility of his next lie. And for the sake of his story, he'd tell quite a few lies that would deceive not just one person but the entire lower district, and maybe even all of Billabong. To avoid getting caught, he'd prepared thoroughly. Seeing Clara's worried face, Venti gave her a reassuring, gentle smile. "Don't worry. I'll figure out a way to persuade Mr. Svarog." After all, he'd slacked off long enough, it was time to stretch his legs. Chapter 8, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 8, after arriving at the robot settlement. Unlike the dark, silent Rivet town, this place was bright and bustling, thanks to the energy cores used for heating. Still, it was only a slight improvement. Above them, the sky was as black as ever, filled with enormous gray gears and faintly glowing transport pipes carrying Geolatus up and down. It wasn't humans who filled the pathways here but automatons. From common war dog models and beetle types to specialized tactical spiders and the more heavily armored grizzly and fang wolf models, the entire range was present. Most of them were battered and worn down, some even had exposed power cables, dripping oil onto the floor. A few were dragging the wreckage of self-destructed spider models, pulling them in for part salvage and reuse. The moment Clara spotted these war-worn automatons, she hurried over to help. Though young and adorably innocent, she was no ordinary little girl. In terms of mechanical engineering, she was as skilled as any master with decades of experience, even earning Mr. Svarog's recognition. Nearly every automaton in the robot settlement had undergone her repairs or modifications. But just as she busied herself with the damaged units, a beetle-type automaton approached Venti, speaking in a polite, synthesized male voice. "Greetings, Miss Venti. Mr. Svarog wishes to meet with you." It added in a recorded message, "The results of this discussion will determine the assessed risk factor for the target individual. Should it fall below the safety threshold, the target will be subjected to a 2-month observation period, during which contact with Clara is prohibited." Whoa, this sounds intense. Venti scratched his cheek, muttering in a low voice. Looks like the welcoming committee is anything but friendly. The thought of not being able to accompany Clara inside filled him with a pang of anxiety, as though his plans had been found out. The beetle, or rather, Beetle T-800, continued in its calm, gentlemanly voice. "According to the robot settlement database, your background, unknown. Gender, unknown. Motive, unknown. Trustworthiness, pending. Classified as, unidentified information. Conclusion, you are not a member of robot settlement. In human cultural terms, the stranger here is you. Please proceed, Miss Venti." Alright. I'm an uninvited guest, after all." Venti wasn't troubled, in fact, he chuckled and shifted the topic. "By the way, I'm curious as to why you're calling me Miss. Doesn't your database say my gender is unknown?" For a moment, Beetle T-800's eyes flickered between red and green, as if puzzled by this minor oversight. Insufficient physical data to resolve query. Supplementary conclusion, the designation was manually programmed by Miss Clara. So that's it. Well, if it's Clara's doing, that explains it. Venti chuckled, finally understanding. These automatons sometimes felt far from ordinary machines. Their eyes seemed as advanced as any he'd seen, surpassing even the Tilling machines of Ka-Enra in logical processing. It made him wonder at the technological marvels of Jarolo's past, a civilization so rich, yet just a mere fragment in the vastness of the universe. The world was indeed vast, and he knew the day would come when he'd leave this place, journeying to gaze upon a billion stars in their shared breath. With his thought lingering, Venti followed Beetle T-800 deeper into the robot settlement. The inner area wasn't much different from the outer parts, except for a spacious square large enough to fit 100 people. In the center, 2 automatons were sparring, surrounded by onlookers, especially children who cheered the loudest. The robot settlement was on high alert, people couldn't work 24 hours a day. They needed some outlet to ease their mental strain. As it happened, the settlement was home to many retired automatons, around 80 to 100 in total. Some independent mechanics even brought their own mechanical pets to participate. The whole thing was like a cyberpunk version of beetle fighting. While it wasn't the most thrilling of matches, most combatants were low-grade beetle models, the atmosphere was lively, like a Pokemon battle between 2 metapods using Harden and Tackle. Compared to the grim, life-or-death black market fight rings of Rivet Town, it was a far better alternative. Even if those fight rings offered more spectacle, Venti always avoided such places of condensed vice. After wading through the crowd and exchanging greetings with a few settlement residents who recognized him, Venti finally followed Beetle T-800 to Svarog. He stood before a large, fortress-like building that looked fit for a military command center. The building's exterior bore signs of mechanical modifications, with a core energy source nearby, radiating heat that made the air around it shimmer. It was thanks to these energy cores spread throughout the robot settlement that the area was warmer than the outside, even uncomfortably so. It was likely no issue for automatons like Mr. Svarog, who often occupied the space. And perhaps this was why Clara preferred to walk around barefoot. At this moment, Svarog was connected to several data cables, managing the automaton control terminal. His single, rose-hued eye glowed as streams of data flashed across it. With his alloyed purple helmet and powerful build, he looked every bit the battle-hardened machine, prompting Venti to blurt out, "Hey there, big guy." Venti didn't care if Svarog was busy, he approached with his usual easygoing cheer. Calling him big guy wasn't without reason. First, Svarog had indeed done a great deal to keep the lower district running. This was why Wildfire never gave up hope of working with him. Second, in a way, he was Clara's guardian. If they formed a team, Svarog would be their trusty shield and protector. A title like Old Man wouldn't be out of place. Biothermal signature detected. Recognizing biological data. Identification result, barred Venti. Hostility level, none. Routine calculation complete. Scan result will be logged in this record. Completion era, year, month, day. The data flow in Svarog's eye dispersed as he turned a penetrating gaze on Venti. Although he was a machine, not a living creature, and eye contact might not technically apply, Venti felt a strange mix of humanity and extreme logic in that mechanical gaze. So, big guy, other than showing off your security protocols, what did you want to talk about? Let's cut to the chase and chat openly, yeah? Venti tried to sidle closer, but Svarog held him at a firm arm's length with his steel hand. Please maintain an appropriate social distance. Svarog wasn't one to fall for friendly gestures, and his synthesized voice was as reliable and solid as his appearance. Now, I will commence the interview. Considering Clara's trust in you, I will grant you a second chance. Alright, then how about this? I am here for the future of the underground. Svarog's response was cold and unyielding. Worthless rhetoric. You are not of the underground and have no right to represent the people of the lower district. State your purpose clearly, and do not waste the precious time this world has left. How would he respond to that? Chapter 9, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 9, oh, so that's how this was going to play out. Vedi sighed dramatically, feigning disappointment. I always thought I had the crowd-pleasing charm, but I guess that doesn't work on machines. I'm seriously crushed. Predictably, Svarog didn't take the bait. Thanks to his connection with Clara, he didn't press down on Vendi, either. Instead, he calmly analyzed, our discussion's purpose is not to create a sense of enjoyment, Bard. I have a mission to fulfill, and you have a talent for entertainment. These two things do not conflict. He continued, if your aim is to bring more psychological outlets to the people of the lower district, slowing the spread of despair, then my calculations show a 98.76% chance of you achieving that goal. In other words, if Vendi simply stuck to his role as a bard, even Svarog would acknowledge his value. That won't do, Vendi said, shaking his head and looking up at the super machine called Mr. Svarog. Poetry and performances can ease troubled minds, but they lack the power to lead people out of despair. Even if I devoted all my time to this, I could never reverse the grim future this city is headed toward. Svarog's analytical systems paused for a brief moment as he detected a tinge of melancholy in Vendi's expression, a hint of some emotion, foreign and intangible, held only by those from beyond this world. You're clear on your limitations, Bard, Svarog stated bluntly. You should understand that by giving Clara visions of a hope you cannot realize, you will bring her not empowerment, but guilt and despair over her own helplessness. It was likely the reason Svarog had requested this meeting. Vendi's closeness with Clara meant he'd shared many exclusive stories with her, most of which involved Mondstadt. It was one of his rare indulgences. And now, it was time to weave those threads into the tapestry of his plan. Oh, has Clara told you the story of Mondstadt, the city of freedom? Feigning surprise, Vendi watched Svarog closely. But Svarog wasn't swayed, he could read the slightest facial changes, and his analysis confirmed Vendi was merely using this as an entry point. Clara has indeed mentioned it. But I find little value in it. Mondstadt's fragile governance and poor crisis response reveal much. More importantly, if one removes the contributions of outsiders and gods, I calculate a 0.2379% chance of Mondstadt's self-preservation in times of catastrophic crises. Conclusion: this scenario lacks the necessary conditions for approval. You're tough but fair. Knowing he'd been seen through, Vendi laughed softly yet held his ground. But don't you think Mondstadt's situation is, in some ways, similar to Billabog's? Your argument lacks sufficient theoretical basis. Explain further. Svarog remained stoic and intensely logical. Not that he could be anything else. Why, in a world devoid of gods, has Mondstadt continued to follow the path of freedom for centuries? Vendi asked lightly. Is it the people's faith in the Anemo Archon, the structure of their governance, or both? Svarog processed for a moment, seeming to ponder something but did not interrupt. Let's take another angle. How would you assess the faith Billabog's citizens have in the preservation Aeon? And how does the Supreme Guardian sustain it? This question caused Svarog's systems to pause again. In his era, people had wholeheartedly believed in the preservation Aeon. Because they had, indeed, witnessed miracles that allowed them to survive. But hundreds of years had passed since then, and the Aeon's favor had not returned. This faith had long since eroded, leaving only a brittle shell. Nowadays, only the Silvermane Guard seemed willing to claim they still believed in it. So, you see? Vendi continued, his voice soft but sure, while Billabog's citizens outwardly revere Klopeth and even built a palace in their name, most people's first prayers are for their own needs, not the Aeon's greatness. Svarog remained silent, listening to Vendi's whispering words. Time has worn away trust in Klopeth's power, leaving only an empty dependence on the authority of the architects. I've seen no chapels dedicated to Klopeth in Billabog, no true faith exists here anymore. The Guardian herself has done nothing to rekindle it, and many of her decisions have only further eroded it. This erosion of belief couldn't be blamed solely on the people's lack of devotion. Without signs from the preservation Aeon, faith alone couldn't fill people's bellies or shield them from the elements. In the Golden Theater, the packed shows were always about the Supreme Guardian, not Klopeth. Rather than songs of the Aeon's glory, people preferred stories of heroes they could see, written down in the ink of history. Perhaps it was a fate that most gods would one day face. When enough time had passed for both to process their thoughts, Venti finally spoke again. Let's set aside belief and deance for now, and return to humanity. If Mondstadt's survival relied on each Knight Commander's dedication, then what do you think of its current acting Grand Master? Svarog replied instantly. To the people, Jean Gunhilder is a knight who is sincere, kind, and devoted to her duties. To her colleagues, she is steady, trustworthy, and worthy of their confidence. But she is not suited to governance. She is overly concerned with the welfare of her people and micromanages. This not only leaves her entangled in trivial matters, but also prevents her from building a strong enough team. Svarog then added, however, this stems from her lack of experience and does not preclude future growth. If you intend to compare her to the Supreme Guardian, then I will tell you that the people would likely prefer Jean. But it's irrelevant. At Venti's gaze, Svarog looked up toward the massive gears above, the crimson glow of his lone eye dimming slightly. To the people of Billabong, the current Supreme Guardian, Cocolia, was chosen by the architects. She is their lawful ruler. No matter how irrational or extreme her decisions are, they were made by the person entrusted to lead. In other words, this is a human issue. And my role is not to oppose her, but to ensure the survival of the lower district, even if only by a single millisecond more. As Svarog spoke, a heavy silence settled over them. Even if her actions are leading Billabong toward its own destruction? Even so, she is a more credible leader than any from Tales of Heroes. Svarog's tone was cold, yet final. I am aware of your doubts about her leadership. But she is the best option Billabong has. Venti couldn't argue, even if he could summon Jean right here, she wouldn't be able to handle these issues. As Svarog said, Jean was suited to governing a town, but these circumstances required a different kind of leader. Jean was not a native of Jarilovai, nor was she entitled to determine the fate of its people. Wildfire were in a similar predicament. Their members varied in education. Some, like Natasha, had traveled beyond the walls as field medics, while others, like a certain purple-haired wildcard, hadn't even completed elementary school. Although they commanded respect in the lower district, the complexities of the upper district required different skills. Even someone like Natasha, who had enough credibility to be taken seriously, lacked something crucial in the eyes of the upper district's people. And that was, lawful claim. A lawful claim could come from bloodline or law. The unifying factor was that the person meeting these conditions had the right to rule. No matter how talented others were, they couldn't simply take away that lawful right. They could either crown themselves and risk being branded rebels or maneuver within the bounds of law and see who triumphed in the end. The battles for these rights had filled history books. And Cocolia was the last victor standing on this rule. No matter how incompetent she seemed as a tyrant, she was the architect's lawful tyrant. In a way, she represented not only the people's will but also absolute and lawful authority. Rallying Wildfire and a robot settlement to storm her palace would be easy. But that would only throw society into chaos, unleashing horrors from Pandora's box. There had never been a Supreme Guardian assassinated openly. Even if she committed countless blunders, people would view her killers as terrorists bent on overthrowing society. This meant that defeating Cocolia required more than brute force. First, they'd need to drain her credibility to the lowest possible point, stoking public resentment until they wanted nothing more than to see her hanged. Then, with enough pressure from public opinion, the front lines, and internal management, the architects and legitimate successors would enact an emergency mandate to seize control, a total reformation of Billabong's leadership. Only then would Billabong be saved from its final step toward the cliff, refocused on facing the threat of the Stellarin. So, did such a person exist, someone with a legitimate claim, a sense of duty, and the will to restore Billabong's future? As it happened, Venti knew just the person. Chapter 10, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 10. It had been 2 hours and 34 minutes since Venti left the robot settlement and reached the upper district. It was now evening, and dusk's light was slowly retreating from the city, draining the brilliance from this city of preservation. Dark shadows crept out from the corners of buildings, casting the city's edges in an eerie emptiness, giving it a sense of abandonment. This was no surprise, the outer sections of Billabong had long been ravaged by the fragmentum. People there were forced to move closer to the city's safer core. Initially, many of these displaced people were sent down to the lower district. After the lockdown, they were forever separated from their families above. Among them were those like Natasha, compassionate people who chose to stay below to help others, only to be locked in, unable to return. Though Natasha didn't regret her choice, who could really sever ties with family without feeling pain? Her foster parents were quite old enough that any news of their passing wouldn't be surprising. As their daughter, she couldn't be there to care for them, not even to exchange simple words of comfort. It was a source of sorrow for Natasha. After meeting Venti and becoming friends, she occasionally asked him to take letters to the upper district for her. Natasha wasn't the only one. Others from the lower district would also ask Venti for favors, tasks he could easily complete while he was up there. Whenever he returned, he was met with grateful thanks. Sometimes he even witnessed tearful reunions as family letters were read. These experiences always left Venti with a heavy heart. They were also part of the motivation behind his current plans. As for his conversation with Svarog, let's leave it as a mystery for now. What really matters is Venti's next move in the upper district. So far, his hero's team had 2 members, Seal and Clara. The latter would likely bring along her powerhouse guardian, Svarog. Thanks to Seal's role within Wildfire, he could potentially influence both Natasha, Wildfire's backer, and Oleg, their leader. This meant that the 2 biggest forces in the lower district were united, eliminating any risk of division or backstabbing. The next step was to push this unity forward while borrowing a bit of external power to help him gain a foothold in the upper district. Of course, as just a mere bard, Venti wasn't in a position to make bold speeches in a tavern, stirring up tales of how a single loaf of bread cost 50,000 Winter City shields in the lower district. People would just assume he'd had one too many bad drinks and advise him to go home and sleep it off. After all, in the upper district, a joke went like this: people in the lower district are so hungry they're down to eating rock crabs for every meal. Rock crabs had once been coastal creatures that laid their eggs in rock crevices before returning to the sea. But when the Ice Age hit, they migrated underground to the warmth of Billabong and thrived in vast numbers. As they tunneled, they often caused cave-ins and were even known as tunnel crabs. Eventually, the majority of the rock crab population reached Billabong's underground, where they became a serious nuisance. The architects of the time had quite the headache dealing with them. Until, of course, someone decided they'd make a great meal. The crab's delicate meat soon became a popular delicacy, appearing at meals throughout the city. In the end, after the Subterra Exploration Unit made several trips underground, they found that rock crabs were on the brink of extinction for reasons unknown. So, while any sensible person might doubt the claim that everyone's dining on crab meat in the lower district, the very persistence of this myth revealed just how out of touch the upper district was with life below. In their minds, the lower district was still that integrated part of Billabong from 10 years ago, a time when both districts lived in relative comfort, at least free from hunger and cold. If the realities of life in the lower district were exposed to society at large, the shock would be profound. But this wasn't a matter of pity or shouting into the void. Besides, too much public outcry might alert the authorities prematurely and ruin his plans. Even if aid organizations were formed, any resources sent below would be barely a drop in the bucket. The people of the lower district didn't want to sell their suffering for the distant sympathy of the upper district. They had strength, resilience. What they needed was a platform to make themselves heard and the power to secure their rights. Otherwise, in the isolated and sheltered upper district, people would forget the lower district altogether, the dim, underground world where people fought against the fragmentum, risking everything just to survive. Only when society grasped this would a true shift occur, forcing Gokolia to make concessions. Only then could they finally improve conditions below. Even something as basic as reopening trade routes would give the lower district a lifeline. Only then would they be spared from death in the mines, spared from huddling in tents with no protection against the cold, and perhaps find rest on a real bed instead of jagged rocks radiating crystal dust. The road ahead remained long and arduous. Venti moved through Billabong's winding streets, watching cars powered by Geomero drive by. People strolled without urgency, considering their options for dinner. People passing by, lights everywhere. It was a scene that, strangely, evoked a pang of loneliness. The bard, ever perceptive, found himself feeling a little homesick. Thankfully, there you are, busybody. A bookish girl stood before him, her expression touched with gentle reproach as she hugged a slim novel to her chest. She was petite, even shorter than Venti's youthful build, which made her look especially cute. A purple beret crowned her head, and her raven-colored hair framed a pair of large, sparkling eyes. Her delicate, rounded face, paired with owl-shaped glasses, gave her a soft, refined look. "Good evening, Pela." Venti recovered instantly, flashing her a mischievous wink. Hey. Chapter 11, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 11, hey my foot. Do you even realize how late you are? Sorry. I just got a little lost on the road of life. Hearing his excuse, the girl, already well acquainted with his personality, couldn't help but want to sock him. Here was this talented storyteller, perpetually unserious, the type whose true fans would be disillusioned to meet in person. And he'd kept the lady waiting in a chilly evening for 30 whole minutes. Her knees were practically frozen. Yet when she remembered that earlier glimpse of him looking uncharacteristically lost, as if he'd forgotten where home was, her frustration quickly melted. It was the first time she'd ever seen carefree, wind-like Venti wearing such a weary, far-away expression. Something about it made her want to comfort him, No, what was she even thinking? Blushing faintly, Pela hurriedly cleared her throat, trying to stay composed. Fine. I'll let it go this time. But make sure you're on time next time, alright? Let's not repeat this. Oh. You've just said it, the very words that all friends say to each other. Guess that means it's my turn to lighten the mood for you. Venti leaned in just close enough to bridge the gap between friendly and familiar, holding out his hand like a true gentleman inviting her to dance. So, go ahead, who's the scoundrel who dared ruin my dear friend's day? Humphrey. Certain scoundrels might just include someone right in front of me, Pela teased, looking away to hide a small smile but not hesitating to hand over the book she was holding. Ah, it was my fault. I should have never made Sister Pela mad. Venti immediately looked downcast, eyes big and guilty. He grinned when he caught the slight flush on Pela's face, though she huffed and puffed in a charming pout, cheeks puffed like a small, indignant hamster. Keep it up, and I won't let you read the sequel to Snowy City Adventures. Got it? She made a show of snatching back the book in his hands. Oh, please, no. Stopping someone mid-book is something not even a demon would do. Venti shook his head quickly, hugging the novel to his chest like a precious treasure. The actual title, Adventures in the Land of Snow, was a forbidden book in Villabog, no longer sold, though the fans remained ardent. The fans had given it a nickname, City of Snow and Rain, inspired by Chapter 2's Frozen City. Since using the real title would draw too much attention, they'd invented this code name. The book was still warm from the girl's hands, faintly smelling of the paper's sweet scent, utterly delightful. Venti often enjoyed others' stories, not just as a reader but to gather tales he could pass along. Of course, his penchant for introducing new bestsellers had dealt a few blows to the market here and there. But Adventures in the Land of Snow was Pela's beloved. She was an unwavering fan, dedicated to preserving its legacy. In fact, she could be called a pure-hearted book lover, with connections to source rare finds, even banned books, without fail. Each time a new installment dropped, she'd buy a handful, then stash some away or hand them out to new converts to the fandom. Which is why Venti frequently borrowed out-of-print stories from her collection. Pela never minded, even inviting him along to fans-only gatherings. The timing was loose, the location was never certain, and those who attended came from all across Billabong, who knew if the person sitting beside you at dinner was one of them. And as much as Venti loved listening to stories, Pela was equally fascinated by his. Where Adventures in the Land of Snow explored vivid fantasy and adventure in an imaginative world, Venti's tales were often achingly real, his descriptions of otherworldly sights so precise they felt within reach. Pela's finely tuned information radar pinged the first time she met Venti, keeping her cat-like curiosity sharp each time he shared one of his stories. Because of her job, sometimes she'd have to step out early, missing part of his storytelling, and it never failed to leave her feeling regretful. But now that they'd struck up a friendship, all she had to do was ask him to fill in the blanks. Otherwise, she'd lie awake wondering. What started as book buddies quickly evolved into a close friendship, and to outsiders, they looked very much like two young sweethearts. While Pela, or Pelagia Sergeyevna as her full name went, couldn't deny the occasional thought, the oblivious Swinburne bard ahead of her beckoned with a grin, breaking her reverie. Come on, Ms. Pela. The night's young, the air is cool. Let's make our way to good wine, good stories, and a bright tomorrow. Rock-grilled Scorp Lizard Grill. This was one of Billabong's upper city eateries, offering casual food and drink. Their specialty was the Scorp Lizard, a staple lower city dish. True to its name, the Scorp Lizard was a burrowing amphibian that lived around the underground waterways. It had feathered scales that were white-pink, nearly translucent, and its eyesight had evolved poorly, though its hearing and sense of smell were sharp. Naturally, while biologists were intrigued by its physiology, most Billabongans, especially those from the lower city, simply knew it as a reliable source of protein, with a taste that was not unlike chicken. Few, if any, Billabongans had ever actually tasted real chicken, but this didn't stop restaurant owners from touting the resemblance. And so, while the meat may have had a faint resemblance, the owners marketed it as a top-shelf ingredient from the lower city, promoting it as the kind of sought-after delicacy that had people lining up before the Great Frost. With a small text disclaimer, similar in taste. Want to sample the exclusive lower city delicacy that took the city by storm before the Great Frost? Scorp Lizard wings, 2 for 20,000 credits, this week only. Many had fallen for this very sales pitch. And now, in a tucked-away corner of rock-grilled Scorp Lizard Grill, Venti and Pela were seated with a plate of freshly grilled Scorp Lizard in front of them. The aroma was enticing, though the unmistakably reptilian tail made it hard for Venti to associate it with poultry. Especially when he thought about what it must have looked like alive. Let's just not think about it, he told himself with a shiver. Chapter 12, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 12. After dishing out their portions, Pela and Venti enjoyed a quiet meal. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. It wasn't their first time eating food that wasn't common in the higher district. Pela, having grown up with a famous adventurer as her mother, had always been exposed to exotic things from either the outside world or the lower district. Though her mother had passed away, her teachings had helped Pela grow into a mature adult, open-minded and accepting of new experiences. As for Venti, his reason for being familiar with this type of food was a bit simpler. It involved a certain purple-haired woman from the lower district. His first meal of rock-grilled cave gecko had been her treat, a celebration of his moving into the lower district. Venti still remembered her pained expression when she paid the bill. He wondered if she was managing to eat decently these days. With a resolve to check in on his squad members in the coming days, Venti swallowed his last bite of gecko meat and was about to raise his hand to order a glass of chilled black rye beer. But before he could, Pela adjusted her glasses, casting a chilling glance despite the warm, dim lighting. Ah, she'd noticed. Reluctantly, Venti lowered his hand and sipped on his soda instead. Seeing his childish reaction, Pela couldn't help but smirk mischievously, like a cat that had just found a tempting bit of fish. Was there something you wanted to say? She asked, feigning innocence. Go ahead and order whatever you like, as long as it's not wasteful. Really, Pela? Thinking he'd gotten the green light, Venti perked up. With a knowing smile at his eager expression, Pela added, of course, but no alcohol. Oh, come on. Venti's face fell. Why are you so obsessed with drinking anyway? Pela asked. You don't even look old enough to drink. It's not the drinking, it's that feeling of tipsiness, when the inspiration hits. Plenty of writers who get themselves into trouble use that excuse. Well, at least I won't be committing any hit-and-run offenses, right? Venti blinked at her with honesty in his clear, lake-like eyes. I mean, I don't even have the money for a car. Sometimes I'm lucky if I even get to eat, thanks to kind souls like you. Pela gave him a sidelong glance, sighing in exasperation. Then save up. Don't blow every bit of money the day you get it. I'd hate to find you frozen next to a trash can one morning. Venti chuckled. Surprises are nice, but I'll keep my surprises pleasant, I promise. He was quietly grateful for her kindness, feeling a renewed warmth toward her. But, really, thank you for your concern. It's nothing to thank me for, Pela murmured, cheeks pink, turning her head away. It's just a hassle for the Silvermane guards if you end up needing help. After their little back and forth, the atmosphere between them felt like honey drizzling over a warm pancake. They continued talking, eventually discussing a book Venti had borrowed. Pela, however, refused to let him read the sequel right there, worrying it might get food stains. In every way, she was a true book lover. Incidentally, due to her unusual memory, Pela often experienced a dual layer of insight after reading, which made every interpretation uniquely refreshing. I would never have thought to interpret it that way, Pela remarked, impressed. It's like you've met the author in person and watched him draft it. Isn't it natural for everyone to have a different take? Venti shrugged. Though he hadn't met the talented writer, he had devoured a fair share of books himself, a seasoned reader, if nothing else. If we're talking just feelings, then sure, everyone's Gorgonsteers is going to be different. But how to put it? Pela tapped her cheek in thought. As Miss Anna in the book would say, you see things from a completely different angle. Or maybe you have a broader view? After pondering a moment, she continued, it's not about who's better or worse, but people without certain experiences lack that depth. They'll naturally follow the thoughts of those who have seen the world, and that gives me an odd feeling, like you're leaving the sheltering walls you grew up behind, stepping out into the distant, wondrous world you'd only read about. Venti was quiet, observing the mix of awe and trepidation on her face, a girl confined to a clock that had stopped ticking. Maybe one day she'd step beyond those walls herself. But with Yerlovai locked in its eternal winter, there was little more than vast, unending snowfields beyond the city, a far cry from her dreams. Pela tilted her head, sensing something in his expression. What's wrong? Did I say something off? No, not at all, Venti quickly replied, it's only natural to think that way. But, please don't mention it to anyone. I don't fancy waking up to the Silvermane guards breaking down my door for a little heresy. Pela's lips twitched at his dramatic expression. Oh, please. What do you think the Silvermane guards are, minions of some storybook villain? Besides, she continued, even if some books are restricted by policy, it's only because our guardian has a solid reason. No one's going to charge you with a crime for dreaming about the world beyond. Phew. For a moment there, I thought this was my last meal. Venti sighed, patting his chest in relief. The last thing he wanted was a one-way trip back to a dark cell, even if there was wine involved. If anyone's suspicious, it's you for even thinking of that. You haven't been up to anything, have you? Just so you know, I'll hold you accountable. Full disclosure means full leniency. Faced with her sudden intensity, Venti protested his innocence, eventually easing her suspicion. After that, they shared one last conversation as the meal wound to a close. Chapter 13, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 13, you know, I found a good venue for your next performance, just like you asked me to. Pela took a sip of her tea, speaking with a measured calm. It's close by, at the Gata Hotel. The event is on a rest day, so it's bound to draw a crowd. Since she had once been part of a band called Mechanical Frenzy, where she even played the drums, Pela wasn't surprised by Venti's desire to find a new performance space. She didn't see other musicians as rivals. After all, they each had their own style. Besides, her resume proudly stated her interest in pre-Billabong music history. In terms of reputation, rock music was relatively new and still had a long wait to go before it would grace the main stage at the Golden Theatre. At best, it was popular among the youth, who often felt their talents were underappreciated and so gravitated toward this fiery music. Billabong's mainstream, however, still leaned toward Venti's style of music. In fact, more than a few had seen Tamila, a major star, personally invite Venti to join the Golden Theatre. She claimed they desperately needed a bard like him, someone with true musical knowledge. Even the lead guitarist of Pela's old band, Serval, hadn't received such an honor, unless she'd been willing to drop her electric guitar and take up classical music instead. But knowing Serval, the odds of that happening were next to zero. She'd never be one to trade her edgy style for a gown and an air of elegance. With a mental chuckle over Serval's stubbornness, Pela turned her gaze to Venti, who also seemed deep in thought. She couldn't quite understand why he'd pursue these low-paying gigs, but she trusted Venti had his reasons. All she needed to do was support him. Well, probably because they were fellow book lovers. Yes, that was it. A rest day would be perfect? Do you have time off that day? Nope. Don't take us for idle hands. The Silvermane Guards only approve time off for serious injury or retirement. Pela shook her head, her face turning a little grim. That can't be healthy, working non-stop at that level. How do you even handle it? You adapt. After all, recalling a certain figure, Pela's expression grew respectful. Even the future guardian herself has been fighting alongside us. If she can manage, we, her subordinates, can hardly complain, right? Oh, what's her name? Sounds like someone worth meeting. Venti's smile turned mischievous, imagining her surprise when she eventually met him in person. Lady Bronya doesn't have time to sit around with you like I do, she's incredibly busy. Realizing she might have shared a little too much, Pela scanned the area cautiously before leaning closer to Venti, lowering her voice. Anyway, just forget about that. But promise me you'll share the story or poem you tell during the performance. Of course. I'll make sure you get the best seat. At his promise, Pela's expression softened, her smile warm and sincere. In the dim light, her lips, still glistening from the tea, had an almost pearly allure. So, it's a deal. But if you're late again next time, I'll have to stomp on your toes. That's practically a reward to some people, you know. Venti chuckled, watching Pela falter, speechless and embarrassed. As a well-read person, she obviously had some idea about such things. Honestly, you're impossible. Yet, despite her scolding, she couldn't bring herself to actually stomp on him. With a faint blush, she shot him a few warning glares, then stood up to pay the bill. Facing the odd looks from the staff was a bit embarrassing, but since Venti's finances were stretched thin, she figured she'd pick up the tab so he could buy gifts for the children in the lower district. But Venti wasn't one to take advantage of others so easily. Outside, with the night chill settling in, Pela rubbed her hands together, breathing on them for warmth. Venti, meanwhile, retrieved the mechanical bird he'd received from Clara. With some repairs through elemental power, the bird now looked brand new. Its unusual design caught Pela's attention right away. After all, birds had officially been declared extinct in Billabong's history. There were preserved images and replicas, but nothing this intricate. It looked like something out of a historical museum, not something a starving bard could pull out on a whim. Raising her head slightly, Pela asked, "What's this?" "A gift, for you." "Never mind how you got it, it's clearly valuable." "I can't accept it." "Don't worry. I got it in exchange for a story from a very sweet girl. It may look nice now, but it was almost scrap metal before, and I spent ages fixing it." He winked. "Plus, when I opened it up, I saw it still had functioning gears and components from the Pioneer era. The storage unit's intact, too, it might even hold some information. I figured someone with your knack for secrets would know exactly what to do with it." Though a little bashful at the secret finder comment, Pela's curiosity about the relic outweighed her embarrassment. It's not like Venti was lying. He didn't have the means to buy something this valuable, so he must have been repaying her in his own way. With that, Pela graciously accepted, saying earnestly, "In that case, I'll make sure to look into it thoroughly. Once I've checked it over, I'll decide what to do with it." "Exactly. Treat it well, it might just bring you some good luck." At Venti's mysterious tone, Pela rolled her eyes with a soft smile. What she didn't know was that the mechanical bird really did bring luck to its owner. With the blessing of Barbados, it had enhanced smart navigation, environmental recording, and crisis detection functions. Even simple tasks, like warming its owner with a comforting breeze, fell within its abilities. It even held additional hidden features that Pela would discover in due time. Once he confirmed the bird was operating smoothly, Venti offered, "It's getting late. Need me to walk you home?" "Ah, no need. I'll be staying at the intelligence department overnight. It'd be inconvenient to bring anyone along." Pela was so engrossed with the bird's seamless movements that she answered automatically. Realizing her words a moment too late, she blushed, refusing to meet Venti's gaze. Wait, didn't that imply that if she weren't going to the intelligence department, she would let him come over? Is that so? Well then, may the gentle breeze see you through a peaceful night. Without catching onto her slip, Venti offered his poetic parting words, bowing with a playful grin before dashing off like the wind. Left alone, Pela glanced at his retreating figure, then down at the mechanical bird perched on her shoulder. Her expression was somewhere between disappointment and quiet wonder. Venti really can't stay still, can he? The bird tilted its head in response, meeting her gaze without a sound. Feeling a bit self-conscious for talking to herself, Pela adjusted her glasses, putting on a serious face. After a quick glance to make sure no one was watching, she let out a sigh of relief. Almost did something totally out of character again. It's strange, whenever I'm around Venti, I seem to lose my balance. Was that a good thing or a bad one? No one was there to answer her musings, and by the time the wandering bard encountered a new rift shortly after, he was already on the move again. Chapter 14, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 14, the outskirts of Billabong, at night. Silvermane guards, charge with me. We cannot let a single monster through our line. Yes, sir. Urgent footsteps shattered the silence of the night, a battalion charging forward in response to the young commander's rallying cry as they plunged into the desolate, empty wasteland. Ahead lay a newly opened rift, a festering spatial tear that steadily expanded, releasing streams of corrosive energy. Inside the growing void, monsters spilled out, their presence pulsing in rhythm with the rift's twisted movements. The first wave was composed of faceless masks, floating, soulless creatures made from the distorted faces of victims corrupted by the rift. They had no thoughts, no emotions, and what little humanity remained in them had long been lost. The dark, hollow spheres at their centers drew energy from the rift, casting a faint glow over the frost-spawn fiends that crawled out in their wake. Before the guards, the humanoid creatures' sluggish movements grew alarmingly swift, and their icy, shard-like heads locked onto the Silvermane soldiers who formed a human wall to stop them. As they advanced, their twisted armor crackled, and their frosted blades glinted in the night, each swing powerful enough to exact a steep price from anyone who dared underestimate them. But before they could strike, a young blonde man wearing a silver helm and wielding a shield fashioned from a giant lyre stepped forward with a burst of speed. His boots left an imprint on the ground as his fist landed squarely on the nearest fiend's face. "Take this." A sickening crunch resounded as the frost-spawn fiend was hurled backward from the blow, its icy head splintering and its neck twisting grotesquely as it slammed into the monsters behind it, throwing the horde into disarray and blocking the rift's exit. The young commander waved his hand to signal the troops. "Prepare suppressive fire." Silvermane artillery troops stationed in the rear raised their steam cannons, more like large-bore muskets than actual hand cannons. As soon as the barrels finished heating, they aimed at the monstrous horde that had spread in mere seconds. After a brief pause, the cannons boomed, the recoil jolting the soldiers back. Supporting the artillery were the Silvermane sharpshooters, whose long-barreled rifles were loaded with rift-piercing rounds to pick off the monsters that the artillery blasts hadn't reached. Each shot precisely felled an airborne crystal elemental creature attempting to escape. These bird-like monsters, simple in intelligence but with bodies that continuously lowered the surrounding temperature, posed a significant threat if they escaped into populated areas. The sharpshooters kept a vigilant watch, ready to down any strays. When the artillery stopped to reload, the Silvermane melee troops roared and surged forward. This straightforward tactic often worked well against these low-intelligence creatures. Yet, the young commander sensed that something was off. It was as though they'd been thrown into a boiling pot, the usual chill brought by the frost-spawn fiends and crystal creatures had vanished, replaced by an oppressive heat. After smashing a crystal creature with his oversized lyre shield, he glanced toward another street where his fellow soldiers fought in another skirmish, bolstered by a distinguished presence. "Is that the true front line?" The young commander, Jeppard, muttered under his breath. "Sir. Guard Captain Jeppard." Void creatures are emerging. One of his lieutenants quickly warned him, raising his spear in readiness. Void creatures, aberrations from another dimension with twisted, sickly limbs, had entered reality, their power able to bend it to their will. With a swipe of a jagged claw, one void creature unleashed a surge of energy, sending a nearby Silvermane guard hurtling through the air. His light armor offered little defense against the creature's corruption. The two forces collided, and before the wounded guard could scream, his armor shattered as he hit the ground, blood spurting from his helmet's visor. He convulsed a few times, then lay still. After the void creatures appeared, the front line quickly devolved into chaos. The Silvermane guard's defensive line fractured as more monsters poured through the breach, exposing the gunners who hadn't yet reloaded to direct attacks. Yet, not a single guard retreated. To fall back would break their formation and collapse morale. In the fray, a squad captain roared, "Close the breach. Don't let them through." Despite the high casualty risk, the guards pushed forward, creating a chance for their comrades to survive. Gepard had no time to waste. Even though he worried about the other front, providing support would mean resolving this battle here, and fast. Making his decision, Gepard shouted, "In the name of Lando." He charged, raising his Lyre shield high. A surge of his protective power flowed through him and into the shield's resonance, triggering its defensive field as a wall of ice erupted from the shield's base. Through snow and frost, forged in resolve, unyielding. In an instant, a towering barrier of ice rose, pushing back the horde while a translucent shield coated every Silvermane guard on the field. Attacks from the remaining monsters glanced off the shield, leaving nothing but minor ripples. To all Silvermane guards, charge! With Gepard leading the charge against the void creatures, his courage ignited the spirit of the other guards. They followed his command, mounting a coordinated counterattack that hit the rift creatures with overwhelming force, scattering their ranks. No one noticed a refreshing breeze sweeping through the stifling battlefield, clearing away the stifling heat and invigorating the soldiers. The warriors grew stronger with every clash, while on the other battlefield, their comrades were locked in a grueling struggle. Across town, a monstrous beast emerged from a rift, a towering creature clad in thick armor, roaring flames radiating from within. The Silvermane troops standing guard had steeled themselves to face death. Only the valiant figure at their head kept them from despair, directing them with impeccable precision and tactical prowess. Yet no amount of tactics could erase the gap in strength, and the young woman on the front line grew paler, her face flushed with fever, her throat raw from shouting. Her gaze darted frequently to her comrades, many of whom bore severe burns and were nearing exhaustion. Anxiety and a forced calm warred within her. And yet, a grim thought lingered in her mind, one she didn't want to consider. Had her mother's plan gone wrong? Chapter 15, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 15, the Rift's flame beast, or more accurately, a creature of extraterrestrial flame. Just by existing, these monsters spread scorching flames across the battlefield, making them some of the Silvermane Guard's most troublesome enemies. Though they weren't impossible to defeat, subduing an extraterrestrial flame-level opponent required considerable manpower, supplies, and weaponry, along with elite forces capable of resisting its attacks. Without such resources, the guards would suffer heavy casualties just to achieve a Pyrrhic victory. Tragically, every recent battle victory under the current Supreme Guardian had come at this cost. Bronya Rand, young successor to the Guardian, was well aware that she couldn't handle this beast on her own. Even keeping it at bay was pushing her limits. As her stamina waned, her attacks weakened, leaving her powerless against the creature, which never tired. If this continued, everyone here could be at risk of death. Bronya could feel the weight of her inadequacy. Yet she couldn't disobey orders. Earlier that evening, she had received a direct command from the Supreme Guardian: suppress the newly spawned rift spreading into the edge pathways and hold the station square until dawn, buying time for reinforcements. But given the current situation, holding the line until dawn seemed impossible, and promised backup was nowhere to be seen. Dodging another volley of fireballs, she gritted her teeth, raised her rifle, and took another shot. Her bullet, wrapped in a swirling current, struck what might have been the creature's head, but it had no effect. Apart from a few sparks, its shell didn't even shudder. These creatures had no clear weakness, save for elements that countered them. If Gepard had been here, things might have been different. Alone, however, victory was out of reach. Of course, there was another option. She looked at her fellow guards, struggling to stand, trying to shield her as best they could. The rift creature lacked intelligence, driven only to attack anything within its sight. If someone volunteered to distract it, the others could withdraw safely. This would minimize casualties and allow them to regroup with Guard Captain Gepard. Together, they could reclaim this area or develop a new strategy. In that case, the sacrifices made here wouldn't be in vain. It was exactly what her mother had taught her: a ruler must have the vision to weigh the cost of decisions, setting aside personal feelings to make choices that preserve the lives of as many people as possible. Her guards would follow her orders without hesitation. If she told them to sacrifice themselves for the rest, they would not waver. Yes, she only needed to command them. They would go to their deaths so that others could live. This was the tragedy Billabong had repeated time and again. Not only would no one blame her, they would praise her afterward for making the right decision. And those who fell would be commemorated, their deeds honored on stone memorials. So, all she had to do was give the order. After all, it wasn't her first time attending a comrade's funeral, was it? It was almost as if a voice whispered to her, urging her toward this decision. But Bronya forced these thoughts aside, crushing them. Her eyes steeled with a fierce resolve as she changed tactics. Abandoning her defensive stance, she launched an aggressive assault, catching the flame creature off guard. Everyone, now is our chance. Lend me your strength. With her ammunition dwindling, Bronya threw caution aside, breaking free from the creature's suppressive fire. Her Path of Harmony ability bolstered the Silvermane guards, invigorating them and lending strength to their strikes. Understood. The Silvermane guards closed in on the beast, their spears driving into the scorched areas weakened by Bronya's wind-infused bullets, sending sparks flying. The extraterrestrial flame found itself surrounded, and each time it tried to strike, a Silvermane guard intercepted the blow. It could have turned any one of them to ashes with just a few hits, but each time it attempted to charge, distant rifle shots disrupted its concentration. Unable to fully charge its attacks, it was forced to defend against the onslaught. These rift creatures might lack intelligence, but their combat instincts were nearly primal. Sensing the danger of encirclement, the flame beast folded its limbs inward, shielding its core as fiery rings erupted around it. The surrounding air grew unbearably hot, warping as it approached the creature. Fall back. It's about to explode. Experienced Silvermane Lieutenant Dunn shouted, quickly positioning himself in front of the startled Bronya. Lieutenant Dunn? But in the shifting chaos of battle, it was already too late. Several guards, unable to react in time, were caught by the blast. In seconds, they ignited, their bodies consumed by flames, casting an orange glow across the ground. The soldiers screamed as the fire turned them to ash, leaving only charred shadows. Watching in horror, Dunn's face contorted with fury. He threw his spear at the flame creature, striking it hard enough to make it stumble, halting its next attack. Bronya's heart clenched painfully. She fired round after round, but each bullet was deflected by the creature's armor. In her mind, a voice echoed, this was her fault. She had misjudged the battle, costing her comrades their lives. If she had ordered a retreat sooner, those guards could have returned to their families. Lady Bronya, it's too dangerous here. We must retreat immediately. Dunn, sensing her distress, called out urgently. But if we retreat now, all our efforts tonight will be for nothing. And our comrades' sacrifices. Bronya's voice was bitter, her heart heavy with doubt and sadness. The fight had revealed a host of unanticipated flaws in their preparations. And without any sign of reinforcements, it was likely that Guard Captain Gepard's team was equally tied up. If she withdrew now, it would add more pressure to Gepard's position, increasing the risk of losses on his end. Please stay calm. Guard Captain Gepard is close by. Once we regroup, we'll be able to retake this street within an hour. Only then will our fallen comrade's sacrifice mean something. Dunn's voice was urgent as he blocked another fireball with his shield, its handle searingly hot. His palm, even beneath his gloves, was likely blistered. But he didn't falter, standing firm before her. The young woman behind him was the Silvermane Guard's beacon. If she fell here, the impact on the troops behind would be unimaginable. Not to mention the wrath of the current Guardian, or the guilt he himself would feel. Losing this position temporarily was insignificant by comparison. So as he urged her to retreat, he signaled the remaining soldiers. They paused, then silently surged forward, circling the flame creature to provoke it into charging its core again. Only then could the rear ranks withdraw safely. Despite her grief, Bronya allowed herself to be escorted by Lieutenant Dunn as they moved back. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw another wave of fire surging toward her loyal soldiers, as if to swallow them whole. In her chest, it felt as though a fire raged with them. But suddenly, a gust of wind rose from the ground, swirling fiercely around them. Chapter 16, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 16, the Eye of the Storm, centered around the extraterrestrial flame, swept the Silvermane Guards high into the air, narrowly saving them from the fiery ring that scorched everything below. Just seconds more and they would have been consumed in the blaze, leaving them dazed and struggling to believe they had survived. The scent of melting rubber from their boots finally grounded them, reminding them this was no near-death vision but reality. Was it Lady Bronya who saved us? The thought crossed their minds almost in unison. But a few had already noticed Bronya being carried away by Lieutenant Dunn, her expression just as stunned as theirs. It wasn't Lady Bronya? One of the younger guards murmured, confused. But then, a playful laugh seemed to echo around them, light-hearted yet somehow unsettling. All right, time to prepare for landing. Try not to twist an ankle. The gentle voice urged them on, and the guards braced themselves for the descent. The winds cradled them as they floated down, only releasing them at a safe height. Air currents gathered around their feet, preventing their melted souls from sticking to the ground and rendering them helpless targets. Such precise control left even the seasoned soldiers in awe, and what's more, the wind felt like a blessing that sharpened their movements. Fireballs that would normally be impossible to dodge now seemed as light and slow as children's balloons, and some guards instinctively raised shields, surprised by their newfound agility. Who was it? Who could project their voice across the battlefield, pull them out of a fiery trap, and grant them this blessing? Whoever it was, the surviving guards felt a surge of gratitude. But the extraterrestrial flame seemed to sense its growing frustration, and its core flared up. In the scorched patches left by the fire rings, crystalline elements began to coalesce, forming bird-like crystal constructs. It's summoning reinforcements. An experienced guard shouted, hoping to provide any help he could. This was why the Silvermane guards had lost so many to these creatures in the past. As the flame's moving core, the extraterrestrial flame could continuously harness crystal elements from the rift. It could draw on these elements either as fuel for itself or to summon allies, as natural to it as breathing. In seconds, the once spacious street was filled with crystalline beasts. They rose into the air like flocks of birds, their intense heat warping the surrounding environment to suit their birth. No matter how many they destroyed, new crystal creatures would respond within moments, feeding off the residual energy of the fallen to draw in more elements. In an established flame domain, they multiplied endlessly, growing in number until they darkened the skies. Even the best fighters would be overwhelmed, surrounded and worn down by their sheer numbers. The high casualty rate was no mystery. To win against these odds, only a decapitation strike would work. But judging from earlier, the one aiding them was likely aligned with the path of harmony, a supporter. In that case, they wouldn't be able to eliminate the source. As the guards braced themselves to call off the rescue, a soft melody filled the air. It flowed like a mountain stream, soothing and cool, reinvigorating their spirits as their burns began to heal. The gentle power in that melody strengthened the soldiers' resolve to protect this gifted soul who had aided them. Just as one of them began to call out, a green arrow streaked across the sky, descending like a shooting star. The arrow's impact birthed a massive vortex of wind, pulling in the crystal beasts and even the extraterrestrial flame itself. The guards watched in awe as a swirling tornado took shape. The monstrous creatures, which had once plagued the Silvermane guards, were swept up like tattered cloth in a washer, unable to resist the fierce winds. The vortex took on an icy hue, a frosty edge forming around it that slashed through everything inside. When the vortex dissipated, every crystal creature was gone, their elemental energies scattered to their base particles. At the eye of the storm, the extraterrestrial flame lay sprawled on the ground, its core extinguished and its massive body defeated. In stunned silence, the guards absorbed the scene until that same gentle voice broke the spell. Apologies. I had to search a bit for the perfect Everwinter stone, but luckily, I made it in time. This time, the voice didn't come on the wind, it was right beside them. They turned to find a young, striking bard standing nearby. Hey there, everyone. I'm Venti, the greatest bard in Billabog, and possibly the whole world. He proclaimed without shame, as though performing for them on a bustling street. When the guards only stared, Venti gave them a sly smile. Why do you all look like you've seen a ghost? Was my entrance that shocking? A few of the more bashful soldiers quickly averted their gazes, feeling embarrassed. The oldest among them, however, stepped forward to thank Venti sincerely. Further back, Dun and Bronya, who had been retreating, rushed to rejoin the group, Bronya locking eyes with Venti. It's you, Venti. Bronya didn't know what to feel. A mixture of guilt and relief swirled inside her, leaving her momentarily speechless. It's been a while, Lady Bronya. In contrast, Venti seemed at ease, greeting her cheerfully. But the formality of Lady made Bronya's heart ache a little. Her story with him began 1 month ago. Chapter 17, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 17. Back then, Venti had just debuted, his reputation still small, but his skill in playing simple tunes had already charmed some of Billabog's more traditional aristocrats. They hired him to play background music at their soirees, paying him enough to cover a month's worth of wine. Venti had no objections to such a straightforward business arrangement. He would go, perform, then enjoy the free food and drink. Yes, free food and drink were always the real incentive. Along the way, he had met a few political bigwigs of Billabog. Of course, it was a one-sided acquaintance, he only knew their faces. Looking back, If not for the Supreme Guardian's uniquely esteemed position preventing her from attending private banquets, he might have run into her even then. But although the Supreme Guardian couldn't attend, her chosen successor could. After all, for all the Guardian's grandeur, she still needed to fund City Hall and the Silvermane Guards. And those two bottomless money pits devoured funds like flowing water, especially the latter. After a decade of resource pouring and population losses, it was finally ready to strike back at the front lines. Without such lavish funding, who would risk their lives out there? It sounded cynical, perhaps, but it was a reality of the world. History had seen other Supreme Guardians toppled, and if she was to exercise ultimate power, she couldn't overstep certain boundaries. And so, where did the money come from? First, the common folk, who knew little and could be reliably taxed. Second, the noble families of the architects. The former could be harvested regularly, but with the latter, the approach had to be more delicate. The architect families were long established, holding wealth beyond the average person's dreams and commanding significant market influence. Companies like Billabong Heating, Billabong Automotive, and Billabong Trade commanded such power that even the Guardian had to tread carefully. These were not people she could earn like the lower district. The upper echelons had their own intricate alliances. Only through a mix of reward and respect could these relationships be managed. Thus, sending her close confidant and successor to these events wasn't strange at all. In fact, things best left unsaid by the Guardian could be voiced by Bronya with far more grace. After all, Bronya was young, at an age where mistakes were still permissible. The Guardian was not, she could never err, and if she did, it was because those interpreting her will had misunderstood. Under this dynamic, these nobles would often probe the Guardian's stance, adjusting their strategies accordingly. It was as fair as could be. Bronya's first encounter with Venti came after one such negotiation, where she spotted him just as he finished playing and sat down to eat. His joyful savoring of the banquet fare made it abundantly clear that he was, indeed, enjoying the food. To young Bronya, it symbolized this, regardless of one's social class, as long as one worked hard, under the Guardian's guidance, there would always be a full meal. So long as she followed the Guardian's paved path, she would surely lead her people to a happier future. But just as she was about to leave, a snide laugh interrupted her thoughts. She turned toward the sound, where a notorious playboy from Billabong's aristocracy was sneering at Venti, who continued blissfully enjoying his meal. Bronya paused, and the older nobleman accompanying her also frowned, noticing the young man's rudeness and preparing to scold him. But Bronya raised her hand, signaling him to stay silent. The young aristocrat, oblivious to his audience, sauntered over to the unsuspecting bard. Venti, noticing a shadow blocking his light, looked up. "Oh, hello. Can I help you with something?" He met the aristocrat's displeased gaze, baffled. Had he accidentally stepped on his toes? As their eyes met, the aristocrat lifted his head arrogantly, giving a derisive snort. A low-born will always be a low-born. Put a refined instrument in a monkey's hand, and it's still nothing more than a vulgar beast. Wow, that's pretty harsh. Confused by the stranger's hostility, Venti wondered if this was a rival bard. But he hadn't crashed anyone's party. Why did he deserve this? With the growing attention of onlookers, Venti chose not to escalate, standing up with a polite smile. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. We wouldn't want to disturb others' enjoyment of the banquet, so perhaps we could talk outside? I have no interest in conversing with a lowlife." Then why approach me in the first place? Now more perplexed than ever, Venti thought, why do these people insist on looking down their noses at others? Is there some appeal in showing off their nostrils? Still don't get it? Your pitiful understanding is on par with that of a lowly animal. The man's expression twisted in disgust. "Allow me to clarify. Seeing someone like you at an event for people of stature, forcing others to endure your noise. It's nauseating." Venti's smile faltered as he took a small step back, keeping his tone civil. "While I'll admit I'm hardly raking in enough for a lavish lifestyle, calling my music noise and torture seems a bit rude, don't you think? Rude? Don't make me laugh. Do you really not understand who's being rude here?" Taking Venti's retreat as a sign of cowardice, the aristocrat leaned in further, sneering. "You imagine yourself a virtuous artist, humble yet aspiring to reach the heights of music. But to me, you're nothing more than a shameless charlatan, filling others' heads with nonsense about the outside world." He grabbed Venti by the collar, his patience wearing thin. "Listen closely. If I see you here again, I'll have the Silvermane guards drag you out into the snow." "Oh? And just what are you planning to ask the Silvermane guards to do?" A woman's voice, sharp and tinged with anger, cut through the tension. "To throw this godless spreader of lies into the blizzard, of course." The man snapped without turning, only to falter as the elegant scent of osmanthus wafted toward him. He spun around, stunned. Standing before him was Bronya, the Guardian's successor. Her graceful figure, framed by piercing silver eyes that shone like polished steel, was charged with a controlled fury that only heightened her natural dignity. Lady Bronya, what brings you? Enough evasion. I just witnessed your crude treatment of this poet, not to mention your audacity to threaten him with the Silvermane Guard's authority. Care to explain yourself? And thus began the fateful connection between Bronya and Venti, in this curious rescue, of sorts. Chapter 18, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 18, I was only. The young aristocrat, now sweating profusely, suddenly found his talent for insults failing him. His gaze darted around nervously. Seeing Venti looking back at him with calm amusement only stoked his frustration. He pointed an accusing finger at Venti, scrambling to explain. Please, hear me out, Lady Bronya. This so-called bard has been spreading content strictly forbidden by Billabog's laws. I warned him repeatedly, but he had no respect for us, the architect heirs. So, yes, I had to invoke the Silvermane Guard's authority. I beg your forgiveness, Lady Bronya. The brazen lie earned scornful looks from onlookers, and several noblewomen who had been charmed by Venti's performance appeared ready to speak up on his behalf. If he really has done this, I will investigate, Bronya replied, her gaze fixed coldly on the man. But until then, should I interpret this as the Stepan family's attempt to undermine the Supreme Guardian's authority? Bronya's words sent a chill through him, as the weight of her gaze struck him full force. Her poise held a hardened edge, a chill earned through countless battles against rift creatures, a bearing not easily endured by most. Only now did he realize the full extent of his mistake, bringing up the Silvermane Guards in front of the Supreme Guardian's heir, the very faction that held unwavering control over them. To invoke the Guard's authority in front of her was foolish. At best, he'd be accused of bullying, and at worst, he might find his family's skeletons unearthed. This was no idle threat. The young noble grew paler, cursing his own foolishness. With Bronya now questioning his motives, even his family wouldn't be able to protect him. Prison time would be inevitable. A future tainted by prison, marked by crossing Billabog's future leader, such a fate was all but sealed. After staring him down, Lady Bronya finally turned to the bard. Bard. Is what he says true? It was clear to everyone that she had already seen through his lies and was simply following protocol. With a single accusation from the bard and a few witnesses, the matter would be swiftly resolved. Lady Bronya would then order the guards to escort the man away, and the incident would go down as a celebrated tale of justice served by the successor. The hero of the tale would be a humble bard defending himself against a spoiled aristocrat, an act sure to win the favor of the common people. The scene itself proved this, as the crowd eagerly awaited Bronya's judgment. Even the elderly nobleman who had accompanied Bronya sighed quietly. Her skill and cleverness far outstripped that of his foolish young relative. This next Supreme Guardian was truly worthy of her title. But the bard's response stunned everyone. Well, his words were a bit harsh, but he isn't entirely wrong about me sharing forbidden tales. Bronya's brow furrowed. Had the bard simply misspoken in his nervousness? She had heard his music when she entered. The tunes, though unfamiliar, had a soothing quality that could lift the spirit, pure and fresh like mountain spring water. With skill of that level, she could easily vouch for him. The music was far from crude noise or treachery. His admission, however, changed everything. She couldn't ignore a confession of spreading banned material, even if it ruined the entire scene. Tension thickened as onlookers grew uneasy. The aristocrat's face flashed with hope, while others watched the bard with disbelief. Even the elder noble seemed bewildered, struggling to understand Bronya's intentions. Perhaps, he thought, this was a calculated move, a ploy by the Guardian's heir. After all, this was a critical stage for any heir, establishing a reputation through symbolic acts of justice, paving the way for future authority. Finally, Bronya spoke again. Bard, I'll allow you to clarify your words. There's no need to feel pressured. Under the Supreme Guardian's rule, no citizen is subjected to unjust persecution or baseless retaliation. The crowd murmured, briefly astonished by her clear defense of him. Though there was justification, her directness hinted at a profound mistrust of the aristocracy. But Venti held firm. Yes, I've shared tales of beautiful things long forbidden here, and I don't see anything wrong with it. Even now, I want to continue sharing them, so others may know there is more beyond endless snowfields. There are rabbit-shaped valleys, trains that travel among the stars, and forests that never fade. Bronya's face fell, her gaze hardening as she retracted her brief compassion. With a nod, she signaled for both men to be taken away. Through it all, Venti kept his easygoing smile, while the young aristocrat, overcome with hysterical relief, wept and laughed as he was led off. As they passed each other on the way to the cell block, Bronya caught a fleeting glimpse of Venti's expression. He didn't seem angry or resentful. Instead, he looked at her with something close to sympathy. It was as if their roles were reversed, that she was the true prisoner, confined by invisible bars, while he was a bird soaring freely under the open sky. What kind of inner world gave him such an expression? As much as she disliked admitting it, Bronya felt a pang of curiosity. Her subsequent investigations revealed that his stories were less about the world outside Billabong and more like glimpses into an imaginary world. Was he merely a poor soul, lost in his own fantasies? But then again, how could a fool create such clear, pure melodies? Her questions only multiplied until she finally decided she had to confront him. She walked through the cold, dark hallways to his cell, located in the frigid depths of the prison where even the geothermal warmth couldn't reach. She found him lying on the ground, legs crossed, chewing a blade of dry grass and humming a lively tune, utterly unaffected by his imprisonment. The moonlight through the window cast a faint glow over his face, adding a hint of mystery to his androgynous features. Hearing her footsteps, he looked over. She would always remember his greeting, "Hello there, dear Bronya. Have you come to be my new cellmate?" A more insolent taunt would be hard to find, but from him, it sounded as if no honor could be greater. Chapter 19, Star Rail. Starting with a Lyre, living off busking. 19. Once, Bronya had heard a saying, "Dying with grace isn't hard, living with grace is." If one wanted posthumous glory, it was as simple as enlisting in the Silvermane Guards. Any soldier who sacrificed themselves in the battle against the Rift would be honored, their comrades preserving their legacy until they, too, became names etched on the cold stones. But most Silvermane soldiers' lives were far from graceful. They received little time off, hidden injuries from high-intensity battles rarely healed, and those stationed on the front lines might not even return home once a year. Under the current Supreme Guardian, the Guards' casualty rate only climbed, with no sign of decline. To their families, it was agony. This bloody honor, this sacrifice, sometimes seemed to lack value. Bronya deeply mourned the young warriors who perished so soon. Their first taste of war was against creatures that had trapped humanity in Billabong for 7 centuries, merciless, unrelenting monsters that felt no pain and reformed no matter how many times they were slain. All the soldiers could do was form a wall of flesh, winning bloody battles with their bodies alone. This was why, at each soldier's funeral, Bronya found herself filled with a heavy sadness. She could only console the grieving families, telling them that their sacrifice was essential for humanity's survival, words that numbed her as much as them. And though everyone knew it, they all avoided the truth. The current Supreme Guardian, with her single-minded drive to win, was behind the increasing loss of life, pushing the Guards to relentless battles at the front. The rift had not grown to such an extent that humanity would perish without extreme measures. If history was any guide, humanity would have been wiped out long ago if that were the case. Replenishing the population took time, training soldiers took generations. But the rift creatures knew no such limits, the only thing restraining them was the rift's own expansion rate. If Billabong had maintained a cautious defense, lying in wait rather than waging all-out war, the rift wouldn't have grown so aggressively, as though provoked by human retaliation. Data showed that the rift creatures reacted to human activity. Every time the Guards engaged in battle, the crystalline elements left behind served as beacons, sometimes forming eerie phantoms. The former only strengthened the monsters pouring from the rift, making them more dangerous. The latter meant that once defeated foes could resurface at any time. And in the end, the Supreme Guardian's achievements hardly justified the cost. The people were still trapped within the walls, resources had become even scarcer, and the Guards at the front were pushed to their limits. Recently, desertions had even started. Despite the Supreme Guardian's speeches and strict punishment by officers, it was a trend that seemed impossible to stop. If things continued, the final strategy might be to destroy the frontline transport hubs, trapping the soldiers so they couldn't escape. As the Supreme Guardian's heir, Bronya knew far too much. Each time she tried to convince herself that the Guardian had a hidden plan, but each time, she was met with disappointment. Gradually, Bronya came to believe that no one could truly live with grace in this city. Her youthful dreams, too, had withered with age, now nothing but scattered memories. Only the sight of the thriving upper district, still prosperous under the Supreme Guardian's rule, brought her any small relief. But here, in this cold, dark cell, she saw someone who, despite being surrounded by shadows, seemed to live more gracefully than anyone else. This man, this so-called bard named Vendi, appeared to embrace life with a lightness she could scarcely comprehend. Why were you so at ease? Why did you feel no shame? Why could you still joke with me? These questions crowded her mind, but words failed her, leaving her in silent confusion before the cell bars. Vendi, however, was anything but silent. Rising from the floor, he brushed off non-existent dust and, with a mischievous grin, addressed her. What's wrong? Aren't you going to answer? After all, it's not every day you find yourself with such an extraordinary cellmate. What nonsense are you saying? Bronya's control finally snapped as she rebuked him. Do you know you're tarnishing the Guardian's heir's honor? Such disrespect alone is enough to extend your sentence by years. In a city ruled by a single leader, defaming the Guardian was an unforgivable crime. Even if she wasn't yet the Guardian, to the citizens and her colleagues, it was only a matter of time. Even if not for herself, she couldn't allow this bard to continue spouting his nonsense. She had to defend her mother, who had grown distant but remained the Guardian. Oh? Is that what you think of me? Venti's eyes held no fear, only a gentle, almost indulgent gaze, as if looking at a curious child. The feeling unsettled Bronya, though she was surprised not to feel offended. Instead, she sensed he was sincere, and that his view held no malice. If he was serious, why did he arrive at answers so different from everyone else's? Why did he insist on this defiance? Why persist in a path that would only bring suffering and disdain, a path that could never change anything? Why did he continue? Bronya gripped the iron bars, her knuckles white, the sound of creaking metal unnerving in the quiet cell. Then he took a small step back, pretending to be fearful. Whoa, are you planning on roughing me up? Of course not. Exasperated with his antics, Bronya replied coldly. In a few days, the Silvermane Guards will release you. After that, you are not to speak of this matter to anyone, nor continue singing those forbidden songs. It will do you no good. Why? Billabong has always been this way. Is tradition always right? Silence fell over them, and Bronya's lips tightened in anger. Do you wish to overthrow everything Billabong has always stood for? Venti tilted his head thoughtfully. Well, how about everything that's bad instead? Good and bad aren't for you to decide, but shouldn't the people who live here at least have a say? Bronya faltered, her fleeting look of uncertainty caught by Venti's sharp gaze. Leaning in close to the bars, Venti's voice softened, as though offering a forbidden temptation. Don't you want to see it? To know if all your training could lead the people to the life they actually want? To see if those beneath our feet truly live in the peace that's proclaimed from on high, thriving under the Supreme Guardian's care? Chapter 20, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 20, just who are you? Bronya's anger had shifted to shock without her realizing it. Just an unremarkable bard. Venti winked playfully. Think of me as a bird, here to spread poetry and a little breeze of hope. Stop trying to mask your true purpose. Bronya's hand slammed down on the iron bars, the sudden clang echoing through the silent cell, stretching the following silence. Voices from Silvermane guards down the corridor called to check on her, and Bronya composed herself before responding. But when she turned back, the bard's usual grin was gone, replaced by a serious, intent expression. Bronya felt an odd pang of guilt, almost as if she were a child who had been caught in the wrong. Why did she feel so off balance in front of this poet? He was, after all, just a prisoner lost in his delusions. I've never hidden anything from you, have I? Veti's voice was calm. Dear Bronya, I truly consider you a friend with whom I can speak openly. My words might not be what you want to hear, but they're honest. How can I trust you? Bronya scrutinized his face, sincere but unreadable, and tried to remind herself of her duty, to distinguish between what people wanted her to see and the objective reality. Haven't I already told you the way to find out? Go to the lower city yourself. Only there can you see the truth behind Billabong's shadows. Venti extended his hand to her through the bars. If you're willing, I'll personally show you. So, are you from the lower city? She asked cautiously, ignoring his hand. Unfortunately, I'm not. Venti was a mystery, no registered identity, no assigned background. Just an untraceable ghost who had somehow slipped into the city. In a more stable world, people like him would be detained for questioning, but Billabong had too many like him to keep track of these days. Then where are you from, and why speak for the lower city's people? Are you motivated by personal gain? You're quite the inquisitive one, Venti sighed, retracting his outstretched hand. Well, first of all, I'm from a distant planet. As for exactly how far, even I can't say for sure, so I'm afraid I can't fully explain it. Bronya stayed silent, clearly unconvinced but listening intently. Second, why do I speak for the lower city folk? Well, have you ever heard the saying, if you see injustice, lend a hand? If not, you could simply think of me as a meddlesome type who can't stand to see others suffer. Veti scratched his cheek, smiling ruefully. After all, with the ability to help, how could I just do nothing? Otherwise, I'd toss and turn all night. The first part, I'm uncertain about, but as for the latter, you're not wrong. Those who have the ability should contribute to society, just as my mother has brought stability to the people. Seeing Bronya sidetrack into another defense of her mother, Veti sighed inwardly. Convincing someone so carefully indoctrinated was a tricky business, especially when they refused to simply see the reality for themselves. He understood, but still, what a headache. And your final question? For reasons she couldn't explain, Bronya found herself oddly amused by his furrowed expression, though their conversation hadn't exactly been pleasant. "That one's the simplest," Venti replied. "If the lower city people lead better lives, more of them will come to my performances. It would be wonderful, helping others while also thriving in my own craft." The simplicity of his response felt authentic, and Bronya was almost certain he genuinely meant it. She finally concluded, "I acknowledge your intentions, but your method is flawed. You're only creating misunderstandings." To strengthen her argument, Bronya softened her voice. "If you wish to spread hope through song, joining the Golden Theater should be easy enough for you. That will be the best platform for your message, and the earnings will be yours to direct, minus taxes, of course. Whether you choose to establish a charitable fund or gather donations for the lower city people, these would be proper, legitimate actions worthy of respect." For a moment, Venti's smile seemed distant, almost detached. Bronya felt a sense of urgency she couldn't place. "If, in the process, you encounter difficulties, don't hesitate to come to me," she added. "I can offer support, but you must promise to put any earnings to good use. That way, people, no, my dear Bronya. Perhaps it seems right to you, but it's far from what they actually need." Looking weary, Venti sat back down, his gaze drifting toward the narrow view of the outside world through the iron window. "I have to tell you, some birds can't be caged, their wings are painted with freedom's light. And when they soar, to trap them would feel like a crime." Bronya, lost in thought, was jolted by his next words. "Your well-intentioned plans won't change the reality of their hardship, nor will they restore the lower city to any semblance of normalcy. Instead, they'll only create new conflicts. In the end, your methods merely reinforce their cage, and soon, the newborn birds won't even know the sky." Finally, Bronya understood why he'd spoken so boldly to her before. The way her mother turned a blind eye to the lower city's plight had stunted an entire generation's education and security, and that very disregard for the people weighed on her as guilt. Their conversation ended on this somber note. Days later, Bronya was called to the front lines, leaving little time for anything else. Her duties as the heir to the Supreme Guardian kept her busy. By the time she resolved to investigate Venti's truth herself, the prison cell was empty. No matter how many guards she sent to search, Venti always vanished just when they thought they'd found him. Since then, she felt as though a piece of her heart was missing, a piece she knew all too well but couldn't bring herself to accept, not until the moment she met him again. And in that moment, she knew she'd always believed him, she had just been waiting for a reason. Now, her reason was before her. Should she reach out, she wondered, to grasp this bird who promised her the winds of change? Chapter 21, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 21, Lady Bronya, you know this poet? Perhaps noticing the awkward tension swirling around the two, Lieutenant Dunn spoke up, trying to ease the situation. "No wonder you were so determined to hold the line. My apologies for misjudging your intentions and delaying your counteroffensive strategy." "No, Lieutenant Dunn, you're too hard on yourself. Your decisions were sound, it's my own hesitation that nearly failed us." Bronya shook her head quickly, looking at Dunn. Lieutenant Dunn was a seasoned Silvermane officer, a mentor who had trained most of the younger Silvermane guards. He was one of the few remaining from her mother's generation, a man with a history as formidable as his position. Every action he'd taken during the battle had been to keep the front intact. Now, he was even trying to offer her a graceful way out. Anything less than gratitude would be ungracious of her. As her gaze shifted, she looked at the Silvermane guards who had been prepared to lay down their lives for her. Among them were seasoned soldiers and rookies alike. Some were small in stature, and one appeared to be barely a teenager. "To each of you, I may not be able to express my gratitude fully here, but please, accept my deepest thanks." Bronya lowered her head to them in sincere, solemn respect. The Silvermane guards exchanged glances, and then, without protest, each stood straight and offered her a salute that conveyed their loyalty, second only to that which they owed to the Supreme Guardian herself. When this exchange ended, the tension in the air dissipated. The renewed strength in their eyes steadied Bronya's once uncertain heart. She turned to Venti, who had been watching the interaction with a faint, amused smile. He still wore the same relaxed, approachable smile that had made her feel at ease all those months ago. Only now did she realize why he'd believed she had the power to change things. Behind him, the monster from the imaginary beyond lay beaten and barely breathing. The thing that had overwhelmed her and her team, forcing the heir of Billabong to flee, was now little more than a vanquished giant. Bronya's gaze softened with a tinge of self-deprecation, but she forced herself to stand firm as she said, "Thank you, Venti. Without you, our losses would have been far worse. Tell me, how can I repay you?" "No need for repayment. We're friends, aren't we, Bronya?" Venti winked and grinned, his tone playful. It'd be disappointing if I were the only one who thought so. No, you're right. You're a friend I trust. It was a battlefield and hardly a place for easy smiles, but Bronya couldn't help it. She felt a warmth as though his words could melt away any strain she felt. If her mother had seen her now, swayed by a few light-hearted words, no doubt she would have intensified her training. Shaking off the feeling, Bronya continued, I know this may sound a bit forward, but could we handle this creature's remains? If left alone, it will eventually recover. If that happened, it would threaten her Silvermane soldiers all over again. She couldn't keep Venti by her side as protection, surely, he had his own goals. Preparing herself for whatever terms he might request, she was surprised when Venti merely stepped aside, revealing the creature that clung to life behind him. Naturally. Go right ahead. There was no hint of self-interest in his voice. And when Bronya raised her gun to finish off the creature, dissolving it into fragments of light, the Silvermane guards around them visibly relaxed. For a moment, Venti watched in thoughtful silence, realizing how much these soldiers had endured. To him, vanquishing such a creature was a small feat, but for the Silvermane guards, it had been an enormous trial. Many of them had witnessed friends engulfed by its flames, likely feeling grief and helplessness long before he had arrived. Once the ordeal ended, Bronya exhaled deeply and instructed the guards to begin clearing the battlefield. Lieutenant Dunn, sensing her need for privacy, tactfully joined in on directing the cleanup. Finally, Venti and Bronya were alone to speak freely. She felt both relief and something else, something more complicated. She wanted to dismiss it as mere paranoia, for thinking Venti might have staged all this. Such thinking, she knew, was the sort of bitterness that would only breed malice in her heart. Still, this scene, viewed from a reunion of old friends' perspective, felt strangely out of place. You haven't changed a bit. Before her thoughts could spiral further, Venti broke the silence with a gentle remark. Did I do something improper? Instinctively, Bronya checked herself, finding no fault, yet he still watched her with an amused expression. Your expression. When you're thinking, you furrow your brows, as if you're deciding what to have for your next meal. My expression is that obvious? She had trained herself to remain impassive in any situation, to let nothing of her thoughts show. Losing that composure, after all, meant losing authority. But judging by Venti's face, it seemed she was failing that test. Acknowledging her weariness, Bronya let her rigid exterior soften, sighing a little. Apparently, you're a better judge of character than I thought. Of course. In my line of work, one learns quickly who will tip well and who won't. A single glance is all I need. Venti's grin was bright, eyes twinkling with playfulness. A distinguished lady like yourself, beautiful, poised, and generous. Why, you seem like the type to tip most handsomely. She could only chuckle, amused by his compliment. I wouldn't squander public funds, but as for private funds, I do have some. Perhaps I'll save a generous tip for you. Eyes sparkling, Venti whistled as though he hadn't a care in the world, making her cheeks warm with embarrassment. He quickly straightened, though, as if noticing her discomfort, and in a more casual tone, added, ordinarily, I'd say long time, no see, but I suppose I should start with an apology. I should be the one apologizing. For sending the Silvermane guards to follow you. Bronya admitted, her voice softening. No problem, no problem. I could tell they were simply following orders. They kept their distance and even protected me on occasion, so I knew you wanted to find me, even if you couldn't bring yourself to admit it just yet. She could only flush as he teased her, fully aware he had read her so easily. In truth, Bronya's delicate features were an ideal of beauty for most people, including him. Well then, shall we call it even, forget it, and carry on as friends? Agreed. In the end, she could only nod. So, do you have any other business here? If so, I can wait until you're done, and we'll go together to that place you've been curious about. His invitation was direct and utterly sincere, with no notion of the late hour or any subtleties. And oddly, despite every logical reason to decline, she simply couldn't bring herself to say no. For gratitude's sake, or for the chance to see firsthand if his truths aligned with reality, she had to agree. Yes. I'll go to the lower city with you. At her response, Venti offered her a gentle smile and a courteous bow. Then, I assure you this journey will be the most fascinating, the most genuine, and the most unforgettable one you've ever taken. Chapter 22, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 22. Captain Gepard's assigned defensive line was located in the rear, at the plaza intended to become Billabog's central recreation center. This space, which was supposed to be a hub of daily life, had remained half-finished, with construction indefinitely suspended once the new rift spread here, now threatening even the inner city's safety. Gepard was the ideal choice to defend it, given his expertise in holding defensive lines. Meanwhile, Bronya's front line was at the transit hub. As one of Billabong's primary transport junctions, it allowed people access to every corner of the city. Unfortunately, that accessibility worked for the monsters as well. They could traverse the entire city through this station alone. Knowing this, Bronya's elite squad was stationed here with strict orders to hold their ground until dawn. Lieutenant Dunn had proposed retreating so that Bronya and her troops could regroup with Gepard's unit directly behind them, allowing them to encircle the monsters. This tactic would lead to a clean sweep by dawn and permit them to return and fortify for the next fight. However, there was no telling how many monsters would escape during that time, which, though unfortunate, had seemed their only option. Fortunately, with the help of Venti, who proudly called himself Billabong's finest bard, they didn't need to retreat. They'd achieved victory early, sparing countless lives. Now, only cleanup remained as they awaited the arrival of the delayed reinforcements. As Venti and Bronya spoke, the Silvermane soldiers who'd finished their sweeps began to reassemble. Any lingering creatures hidden among the buildings had also been quickly dealt with. And they had Venti to thank for that. With his ever-watchful winds guiding them, the Silvermane soldiers were able to spot and eliminate any lurking threats, further reducing their casualties. The Silvermane guards, who had become accustomed to exchanging heavy losses for a hard-won victory ever since the current Supreme Guardian assumed power, never imagined that sweeping the battlefield could be this simple. All they had to do was follow the breeze's subtle hints, locate the monsters, fire, confirm the kill, and move on. Even if a monster managed to fight back, the wind would harden into a shield, blocking the creature's blows for them. The seamless flow of power in Venti's hands left Lieutenant Dunn in awe. "I never thought power could manifest with such freedom and adaptability," he murmured. "I suppose one could say it's the liberty of the wind at work." Though he marveled, Dunn knew how difficult it was to shape one's power so naturally. Even he, with his mastery, could only channel his path of preservation to protect himself. Gepard, a rare talent, could extend that power to defend others. But wielding power like Venti, effortlessly bending it to his will, that was beyond imagination. Even now, Dunn didn't know Venti's path. However, as the bard was Bronya's friend, Dunn felt no need to pry. Once he had finished his conversation with Bronya, Venti respectfully hung back, assisting wherever he could. When they finally wrapped up their mission, Bronya glanced back at him, her eyes bright with curiosity and newfound trust. She, too, was curious about Venti's powers. Out of respect, however, she refrained from asking, preferring to wait for him to share in his own time. Instead, she offered him a formal apology. "Sorry to have kept you waiting, but someone had to stay at the front. If I were to abandon my post, I'd be letting down my comrades and the people of Billabong." No problem, no problem. For me, it was an exciting change of pace. After all, this had been his first time witnessing the Silvermane in action firsthand. He hadn't done so before due to other reasons. In the beginning, Venti hadn't possessed this degree of control over his power. Only as his goals clarified and he actively sought to fulfill them had he gradually unlocked more of his abilities. It was only recently that he had come to fully understand his powers as the Anemo Archon, along with another, stranger force that remained largely hidden yet undeniably real. As for his power as an Archon, it hadn't been at the level it once was during the time of the Seven. He could no longer remake the land or reshape entire realms as he had in records of the past. Yet those legends merely recorded his few moments of unleashed strength, they weren't the limits of an Archon's might. How else could Barbados, once no more than a wind spirit, have guided a young hero toward victory? In truth, the Archon's strength stemmed not only from their Gnosis. First came victory in the Archon War, and then came the Gnosis, an important order of events. Much like the immortal shogun or the elderly sage who ruled their distant neighbors, the Gnosis represented an emblem of authority rather than the sum of their power. Although Barbados was neither as powerful as the two nor had claimed his throne by force, his unique abilities were not to be underestimated. Perhaps, by universal standards, his powers wouldn't seem all that impressive. But to a world struggling through centuries of ice, he might just be the strongest entity around. Add to that the path power that still eluded even him, and his might became unmatched. Of course, his plan to obtain a Stellarin as his Gnosis had been an attempt to attain greater freedom. After all, if he planned to travel the stars, he'd need a few tricks up his sleeve. Otherwise, he might end up hijacked by space pirates, left organless on some black market ship, or worse, forced into a wind-powered generator. What a fate that would be. Besides, taking things by brute force wasn't his style. He wanted his journey to be a quest for learning and discovery. Only by embracing each experience would he be able to grow and embody his ideals. In simpler terms, it was like a player savoring a video game, confident they could overcome every challenge. Lost in thought, Venti didn't notice Bronya's silence. She stood beside him, respecting his quiet, until the dawn broke over the city walls, casting a gray light on Billabong's awakening. When Jeopard arrived with reinforcements, and the supply convoy pulled in, Bronya felt reinvigorated. The arrival of familiar sights lifted the exhaustion from her shoulders. After formally handing over command to Captain Jeopard, Bronya took the belongings of her fallen comrades, departing amid the reverent gazes of the Silvermane. Naturally, as the most eye-catching figure in the group, Vinny attracted plenty of attention. Yet no one dared question his presence. The Silvermane soldiers, though perhaps not scholars, had their own wisdom. Military life was a melting pot of people and perspectives, and they could tell that Bronya's personal guard held the poet in respect. If they could accept him, then he must have earned his place. Besides, there was another reason. Jeopard turned, taking in the scene of the battlefield before him. The area, looking as if a tornado had ravaged it, was a testament to Vendi's handiwork. The eerie absence of elemental activity made it hard to believe this was once a deep rift zone. This poet, it seemed, wasn't only his sister's dear friend, he was a force to be reckoned with. A force, Jeopard decided, that would require careful attention. Chapter 23, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 23, to keep Bronya's outing discreet, why would Vendi choose to make such a conspicuous appearance in front of the Silvermane guards? First, it was to get his face known. No matter what he planned next, having them recognize him might save him from being mistaken as some petty thief. First impressions were everything. After all, any plans to change Billabong's power structure would inevitably involve the Silvermane guards, and earning their goodwill could only help. He didn't expect them to rise up against Gokulia on his behalf, but they might at least go easy on him in any future rebellion suppression campaigns. The second reason was that to gain the trust of Billabong's legitimate heiress, Venti needed to demonstrate his good intentions. He couldn't come across as a skulking vagabond with hidden motives. Everything he was doing here was open and above board, nothing shady or underhanded. In fact, he imagined he'd already been flagged on certain priority lists by the city's authorities, so he didn't mind what this tyrant thought. It was only the beginning of a long game to come. But first, Venti, do I look alright like this? Instead of her usual polished look, Bronya wore something far simpler, a plain outfit with a grey headscarf covering most of her hair. It was hard to imagine her as the shining future guardian. She looked more like a village girl on her first outing to the city. Perfect? You look so down to earth, I'm starting to feel like you're the one teaching me. Venti circled her, smiling with an exaggerated air of awe. Not used to such unreserved scrutiny, Bronya crossed her arms, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. But any further staring would indeed have been improper, so Venti stepped back with a respectful nod. Well, then, let's get ready to go. But with all the Silvermane patrols outside, leaving without alerting anyone will be difficult, Bronya replied, a touch of apprehension in her voice. Once she returned home after reporting to Gokulia, her mother had let her retire to her residence just outside Glippoth Fort to rest, clearly pleased with her performance. But what delighted her mother had less to do with the troops' lower than usual casualties and everything to do with her daughter's achievements. Yes, she saw this as proof of Bronya's superior leadership and quick thinking. Nothing made Gokulia happier than seeing Bronya surpass herself, as if her daughter could become the person Gokulia had once aspired to be. After a few rare words of praise, Gokulia had sent her off with permission to rest while awaiting further orders. As for that little bird of hers with his harmless musical tricks, she considered him more like a pet for her daughter, nothing more. He posed no threat. But that would be a decision she'd come to regret deeply. As the residence of Billabong's heir, Bronya's house was watched over by a thick ring of Silvermane guards, a security measure implemented after a past tragedy. Trying to sneak past them or break through their lines wasn't much easier than breaching Glippoth Fort itself. Fortunately, however, the guards below had become so focused on securing the ground that they'd long stopped looking up to the skies. Venti's solution was both simple and risky: fly from the second-floor balcony up onto the roof, and from there, with a little disguise, take to the air. For someone like Bronya who'd never flown before, the experience was both thrilling and nerve-wracking, her hand gripping his arm tightly, too proud to admit her fear but unable to hide it. But Venti, always attentive, gave her a few gentle words of reassurance. No need to worry, I'll be holding on to you the whole time. And if you get nervous, go ahead and let it out, it'll help ease the tension. For the occasion, Venti had even prepared something special, a set of wings made purely from wind, giving her some sense of security. Though they were mostly for show, the soft, familiar shape of wings eased her fear more than simply floating in the open air would have. So, have you thought of the words you'll use to commemorate your first flight, Miss Bronya? Just Bronya will do. Like before, she replied, catching him by surprise with the unexpected closeness of the gesture. That works too. After all, beautiful names like yours need no embellishment, Venti replied, his easy charm bringing a faint smile to her lips. Part of her wondered if he reserved this warmth and patience for her alone, or if every girl found herself just as captivated. As much as she hated to admit it, she did wish to be someone special to him. The murky ambiguity between friendship and something more left her questioning. They had the makings of friendship, and yet, enemy? That was a possibility too. Perhaps they were most accurately described as allies bound by mutual interest. But deep down, she didn't want their connection defined by such impersonal terms. "I'm ready," she said, extending her hand to him. "I'll do my best to follow your lead and not slow us down." Venti took her hand, surprised at first, but he returned her gesture with warmth and ease. Her hand, so marked by the hard-won calluses of a military life, felt out of place against his, soft and supple. With her mind swimming in her usual cascade of thoughts, a soft breeze lifted them upward, as Branya's eyes met his in a fleeting moment of calm. The initial unease ebbed away, leaving only a strange, blissful peace. The sensation of weightlessness she'd dreaded was replaced by the pure freedom of gliding through the open sky. For the first time, she saw things from above she'd never glimpsed before. Below, the Silvermane Guards lines encircled the city like stone walls. The few human inhabitable zones looked insignificant, encased by ever-spreading rift borders that grew like tumors. Villabog, once the proud city of preservation, now seemed as fragile as a butterfly tangled in a spider's web. Even the imposing Klipith fort that had once inspired such reverence now felt cold, isolated. In its stead rose a sense of smallness, of a city already teetering at the edge. Indeed, standing before those fortress walls, one might sense their strength. But from here, from this unfiltered vantage, she could see the chinks in its armor. For if this city of preservation were to fall, how great would the sacrifice be? The thought alone weighed on her heart like a stone. The ground had never made the city's predicament as clear as this vantage did. They were boxed in by frost and drifts. What remained was no more than a prisoner's cell. Mother must have known this, too, and yet she continued to send soldiers and supplies to the front line to push back. Each small, bloody victory only seemed to intensify the rift's response. The monster incursions only grew fiercer, and the townspeople's lives only deteriorated further with every sacrifice. So many resources, so much potential wasted, all for an outcome that seemed increasingly futile. Were her mother's methods really the right way? Doubt settled into her heart, like roots piercing soil. At her side, Venti's voice called her back to the present. "It's a stunning view, isn't it? But we should prepare for our descent." His words snapped her back to reality, and she turned to look at him, her gaze a complicated mix of emotions. Could he really look at these scenes of entrapment and despair and still call it beautiful? In that moment, Branya knew, this journey would shatter everything she thought she knew. Chapter 24, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 24, everything she saw was desolate wasteland. The town was cast in grim hues, and a sour stench like old vomit lingered thickly on the streets. People drifted by, their gazes vacant and faces numb, trudging like soulless laborers carrying picks as they headed unprotected toward the mining zone. Not far off, a group of thin children played together, their noses red from the cold, long trails of snot clinging to their chapped skin. Their threadbare cotton clothes provided only the most basic warmth. Older folks with weary faces sat on the stoops of their crumbling homes, hands clutching canes that trembled from exhaustion. Their clouded eyes held no spark of hope for the future. What little food they had, they saved for the young and able. When thirsty, they drank hastily filtered snowmelt. When hungry, they tightened their belts. If that wasn't enough, they'd punch their empty stomachs until the sharp pain forced them to stop. Farther along, the sound of a baby's shrill cries echoed from an apartment, soon followed by the angry shouts of a man and woman. Then, the crash of shattering glass. Silence followed, save for the child's helpless wails. From a rooftop, a dark figure plummeted, hitting the ground with a thud like a garbage bag. The mix of red and white fluids pooling out into the alley made a few passers-by grimace as they cursed and quickly moved along. Just standing here, Branya felt a relentless wave of shock strike at her heart. Why? Why is this place like this? Wasn't the lower district supposed to be the secure, stable rear guard? The lower district she had heard of from her mother's reports was nothing like this nightmarish scene before her. Almost to herself, she muttered, How could it come to this? Walking beside her, Venti glanced at her words and answered with a hint of meaning. You probably already have some ideas. But what I can tell you is, this is only a piece of the truth. She lifted her head, bewildered. The first time I saw all this, I asked myself the same question, why is it like this? Venti's pace picked up as he moved toward the children now hurrying to greet him, producing small treats as if by magic and handing them out. The kids' delighted shouts filled the air. The older ones brought some treats home to share with the elderly, who offered him faint, grateful smiles before insisting the children take the food for themselves, grumbling, not hungry. You eat. Watching the heart-wrenching scene, Venti turned back to her and spoke softly. To survive here, the first thing you have to learn is to stop asking those questions. Stop asking? Because for people living here, they never had a choice. His gaze held a faint sadness. Whether it's the crushing poverty or the hopeless future, they face a constant stream of setbacks and losses. Thinking about the things they'll never have, it only leads to anger and despair. Bronya was silent, guilt and shame churning within her. All right. This is only our first stop, Venti said after waving farewell to the children and leading Bronya to Natasha's clinic. On the way, the compassionate young lady attempted to offer the children some gifts as he had, but this trip had been hastily planned, and she had nothing on hand. She suggested giving them Winter City shields, but Venti discouraged her. To them, it would feel less like kindness and more like a condescending handout. The small children would be unable to protect those coins, making them potential targets, and it could foster an unhealthy habit of dependence. Venti himself didn't give the children free treats every time either. Sometimes, he'd ask them to run little errands in exchange. That was why he was able to earn the kids' respect without setting up any unhealthy expectations. By allowing for give and take, he helped them learn that even relationships should be based on mutual respect. Just then, 3 familiar kids came rushing from the other side of the street. It was Hook and her friends from the malls. Leading the group, Hook's face was pale with worry, but her expression changed to one of relief and urgency when she spotted Venti. Something terrible's happened, Honorary Mole Captain Venti. Miss Natasha, she's in trouble. What happened to Natasha? Venti asked quickly. Oh, it's not her that's hurt. The girl next to Hook, Elena, explained breathlessly. They brought in loads of wildfire people. They're all injured really badly. I even saw Hook's dad being called to help dig out a collapsed mine shaft. Julian added, his face tense with concern. A mining accident. Venti murmured. Before he could think more on it, Hook was already tugging him urgently toward the clinic, dragging Bronya along too. Upon reaching the clinic, Hook and her friends were sent home. They were far too young for what lay inside. The cots in the clinic were filled with injured members of Wildfire. Their faces were twisted in pain, sweat and blood soaking into the sheets, including Oleg, who Venti recognized at once. He was badly injured, on the verge of death. Natasha was applying emergency treatment, and at the sight of Venti, she called for his help in getting Oleg into surgery. Bronya, still dazed and unsure of how to assist, stood frozen at the entrance until a cool voice behind her jolted her back to reality. Hey, I haven't seen you around here before. What street are you from? The girl's tone sharpened as she looked at Bronya, who had no response but to stare back blankly. If it's just a small illness, take a seat and wait. They're busy in there. Don't just stand around in the way. Right, sorry. Bronya moved aside as instructed. Only then did she notice that the girl's right arm was injured, wrapped hastily with a blood-stained bandage. Noticing Bronya's lingering gaze, the girl scowled and positioned herself defensively. What's wrong? You got a problem? I didn't mean anything by it. You misunderstood. For some reason, facing this girl made Bronya feel strangely out of her depth. Satisfied that Bronya was harmless, the girl slouched back against the wall with an easygoing attitude. Then, keep your eyes to yourself. Only pickpockets and those lousy scavengers stare at people like that. Pickpockets. Scavengers. Seeing her repeat the words quietly, the girl looked her over with increasing suspicion. There was definitely something off about this stranger. Hey. I'm still waiting for an answer. Which part of? Before she could press further, the red light over the surgery room flicked off, replaced by green. Natasha emerged with Venti at her side, exhaustion etched on her face. Her gloves were stained a deep red, while Venti, though spotless as ever, wore a somber expression. Oi, busker. What were you doing in there? The girl, who Bronya realized was named Seal, rushed to meet them. She looked at Venti with genuine concern, unlike the harsh way she'd spoken to Bronya. Couldn't she have spoken to me that nicely? Bronya thought with a tinge of embarrassment. Oh, Seal. It was touch and go with Oleg for a moment there. Lucky I had the presence of mind to pull my lyre string and sew him right up. Venti's attempt to ease the tension with a joke was quickly shut down by Seal's stern glare. Be serious. The bloodshot look in her eyes, so raw with emotion, caused Venti to bow his head, allowing Natasha to explain. Chapter 25, Star Rail, starting with a lyre, living off busking. 25. Although I really don't want to say this as a physician, Oleg's situation is not looking optimistic. Natasha, visibly exhausted, rubbed her aching temples as her gaze returned to the man still lying on the operating table. His skin was a deep tan, and he appeared to be around 50. His body, muscular and well-defined like a sculpture, was now covered in scars and bloodstains, the worst being a puncture wound on his abdomen. Natasha could only bandage the wound to stop the bleeding, but the rest would be up to his own resilience. If it weren't for Venti discreetly using some power to dispel the crystallized elements embedded in his bones, aiding his recovery, he'd be left with lasting damage, or worse, he might not have survived at all. Now, slipping into a dreamlike state, free from immediate danger, was the best outcome anyone could hope for. Though Natasha had her suspicions, she didn't dwell on them. She only muttered quietly, more importantly, with this battle, the clinic's medicine stock is critically low. If we don't restock soon, many of them could end up with permanent injuries. While Bronya was still processing the meaning behind her words, Seal clenched her fists beside her, a flash of resentment in her eyes as she hissed, "Damn it, if it wasn't for that group refusing to listen and mining recklessly, we wouldn't have triggered the tunnel collapse and attracted those monsters from the rift." That group? Venti, who was about to head out to fetch medicine, paused to ask, sensing there was more to this than just a mining accident. Who else could it be? Those pathetic cowards who only know how to pick on their own kind. Seal's frustration bubbled over, her words laced with vulgar slang unique to the underworld. Where'd they even get explosives with that kind of power? I don't know. Those makeshift bombs were unstable, not only taking down half their people but nearly burying our leader and the negotiation team under the mines. Agitated, she raked her fingers through her hair, frustration clear at not being there to intervene. I was lucky to be outside at the time, so I avoided the blast. But the noise drew monsters right to us, and, well, here we are. Seal rattled off her explanation swiftly. Though lacking in details, it was enough for those present to piece together the situation. I see. Quite a day, Venti murmured with a sigh. This isn't right. I need to go give them a piece of my mind. Seal's anger flared again, and she grabbed her scythe, ready to storm back to the Marauders' camp for revenge. Seal, wait. Natasha stopped her, knowing Seal wouldn't dismiss her so easily and that she'd likely listen to reason if Natasha spoke. Right now, the priority isn't to seek revenge on those who also suffered losses. It's to find enough medical supplies to treat everyone. Natasha's tone was stern. But they have supplies, Seal muttered, reluctant but aware of the logic. And doing that would make you no different from them. Natasha's voice was even firmer. But. Seal bit back her frustration, feeling stifled yet unable to out-argue Natasha, who had years of learning on her side. Glancing over at Venti, she signaled for him to chime in. Instead, Bronya, who'd been silent, spoke up. Excuse me, may I say something? And who are you? We just talked earlier? Who cares about that? I mean, where did you come from, the robot settlement, another stray group, or are you from the upper district? This struck a nerve, as Bronya stiffened, adamantly denying it. Seal, however, noticed the flicker of unease in Bronya's expression. In the past, she'd made the same face when trying to lie her way out of trouble with the boss or Natasha. Now, an upper district resident showing up at such a convenient time, dressed down to blend in, was undeniably suspicious. Not from there? Then why so tense? Seal's expression darkened, and the scythe she weighed in her hands only emphasized her readiness to act if Bronya's answer wasn't satisfactory. Bronya didn't bring her custom sniper rifle this time, not that it would have helped much in close quarters like this. As the tension in the air thickened, Natasha turned to Venti. She trusted him, this girl had come here with him. If Venti vouched for her, she'd extend her trust as well. As the others looked to Venti, he finally stepped in, shrugging as he spoke. Natasha's right, we need to focus on helping the wounded, not wasting time on suspicion. Seeing Venti's stance, Seal reluctantly softened but still muttered, sure, but what if she's a spy from the upper district? I am not. Bronya finally exploded, having had enough of the baseless accusations. Her outburst drew everyone's attention, and she instinctively pressed her lips together, holding Seal's challenging gaze with defiance. Seal, never one to back down, glared back with a look that said, if you want to fight, I'm game. The tension would have continued if Venti hadn't stepped between them, cutting off their heated stares. Natasha took this chance to ask, Venti, who exactly is she? She's Bronya. He stretched the silence, pretending to mull it over. Natasha gave him a reproachful look until he finally laughed and said, a well-meaning person, much like me, here to help the underworld. That's all? Seal still had doubts, prompting Venti to add, fine, if you must know, she's also the heir of the Supreme Guardian, way above my rank, here to understand life down here for the betterment of the underworld's future. And you think I'm a fool? Those pampered up-tops wouldn't care about us outcasts. Seal scoffed. Bronya felt a mix of relief at not having her identity exposed but also guilt and helplessness at the disdain for the Supreme Guardian that had taken root here. The underworld had long lost faith in the upper district, viewing them as indifferent to their suffering, resentment that wasn't without reason. Well, who's to say? Maybe she came on a whim. The mischievous bard grinned. And let's be honest, Seal, You may be clumsy, book-shy, and overly serious, but you have the courage to admit your flaws. I find that pretty endearing. Who are you calling endearing? You smooth-talking singer. Seal's cheeks reddened, but she struggled to hide her embarrassment as she retorted. And don't think I missed that jab at me being dumb. Bronya watched their bickering with a hint of jealousy, her gaze resting on the bard with faint annoyance. There he went, causing trouble and resolving it on his own, making everyone else fret for no reason. He'd once praised her name, always finding words to flatter. Yet, since they arrived here, he'd barely spoken to her, busying himself with others as if he'd forgotten his role as her guide, not that she was surprised he had such a nickname. That look in your eyes, it's really annoying. If you're done, would you mind leaving already? Seal turned her frustration toward Bronya, easily stirred by a few words. Why are you always targeting me? Just as another argument seemed inevitable, a cold stare froze them both, their heads turning in unison toward its source. Natasha wore a faint smile, yet it was anything but comforting. Since you three have so much energy to argue in the clinic, disturbing the other patients, would you mind using that energy to go fetch some medical supplies for me? The request left no room for debate. Even Venti, the instigator of the commotion, didn't dare stir the pot further. Once outside, the three exchanged looks, with Seal huffing as she stood beside Venti, making Bronya grit her teeth. Seal, in her effort to show how close they were, took up her place at Venti's side, brushing against his shoulder. Bronya barely kept her composure. Sensing the rising tension, the troubled bard quickly stepped forward to lead the way. Chapter 26, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking. 26. The underworld once had a dedicated factory for medical supplies. But with the constant erosion of the rift's boundaries and a blockade cutting off supply routes, the factory couldn't operate without a steady flow of raw materials, and soon had to shut down. Most of Natasha's medical supplies now came through purchasing from others and making things herself, but this, naturally, had its limitations. Even the scarcity of painkillers alone was giving her a headache. Currently, the place known to have the most medical supplies was Rivet Town, followed by the other human settlements. The former was scattered across various abandoned areas, and the latter, unless you were like the marauders and could just grab whatever you wanted, wouldn't sell enough for the clinic's needs, even if they were willing to sell at all. So, sending Venti and the others out to search for medical supplies was a last resort. But Rivet Town, a major hub for rift monster activity, was a place even someone as skilled as Seal would avoid going into alone. After all, if you get caught up in a swarm of monsters from the rift, it's not the kind of situation you can just walk away from with a few scratches. Even though Seal had the power of the path, allowing her to move through quantum states at will, the medical supplies, obviously, couldn't do the same. Because of this, when it was decided they'd head to Rivet Town, she frowned and glanced over at the two dead weights. You two stay on the perimeter and cover me from there. No need to go in. No way. Natasha said the three of us should get the supplies together. How can we just let you go into a dangerous place like that on your own? Though she often clashed with Seal, Bronya was, at her core, a kind person and a Silvermane guard with solid experience fighting rift monsters. Solo missions like this were one of Billabong's least supported strategies, or, rather, individual heroics were outright dangerous and generally frowned upon within structured forces. Even accomplished officers like Captain Jeppard or Lieutenant Dunn would never abandon their squad for a moment of personal valor. Humphrey. Don't pretend like you understand how things work here. All you need to know is that down here, there are only 3 ways to do things. Seal held up 3 fingers, counting off as she spoke. Right, wrong, and my way. And all you need to do is listen and follow my orders, you. Just as Bronya was about to retort, Venti once again had to play the mediator. Alright. Didn't we agree earlier, no more fighting? It was impossible to deny, when it was just one-on-one, each of them got along fine with him, but together. They were like fire and gunpowder, one spark, and boom. I don't intend to argue with her. I'm simply stating the facts. It had to be said, though, that Seal was back in her element as they reached the edge of the rift zone, her usual sharpness and cool-headedness returning. Yes. But even someone as mighty as Lady Seal could use a hand, right? They knew just how to nudge her, and it worked like a charm. Ugh, fine, but that's why I said you two could stay outside. Seal's stance softened noticeably. But if we stay out there, we won't get to see your heroics up close, will we? I've been dying to write the song for you. He winked playfully. How about Dreaming Butterfly of the Phantom Sea? Seal paused, giving him a long look before responding. You. For someone who's the weakest of us, you sure act like this is a holiday. Do you really get how dangerous the rift is? Oh, I get it. Inside are monsters fierce and deadly, all set to devour anyone they come across. But, Venti's usual playful tone shifted as he continued. Leaving our friend to face that danger alone while we sit safely in the back wouldn't feel right at all. Venti's right. Maybe you're very strong, but another set of hands can only help. Don't worry about us holding you back, I'll follow your lead. Bronya, unfamiliar with why Seal considered Venti the weakest one, could only guess that the bleak conditions in the underworld might have shifted her perceptions. Living in such a harsh environment, they likely had to push themselves to their limits just to survive. So naturally, personal strength was critical, but that didn't mean Seal didn't need help. Having lived through so much hardship, they all had to understand the strength in numbers. At last, Seal turned away, hefting her scythe onto her shoulder and marching forward in begrudging agreement. Wonderful. Looks like Seal's on board, let's catch up. Venti followed her lead, while Seal, despite her best efforts, could only huff and mutter various safety tips as she reminded them of the dangers ahead. Though her words sometimes took on a bit of a threatening edge, even resulting in the occasional nudge or shove, her concern was genuine, something Bronya could see all too well. During their journey, Venti managed to talk his way into sharing navigation duties, claiming to have stumbled across a map of Rivet Town once upon a time. Bronya, meanwhile, took on a rearguard position, staying vigilant as she trailed behind them. Seeing the town in its desolation hit her hard, she had always been highly empathetic, a trait that had only intensified her reaction to the devastation she'd witnessed so far. But facing a place that was completely overrun and abandoned brought an entirely different weight. This had once been a home, a place where people lived. Her mother's severe policies had reduced it to ruin. Who knew how many had died here, forced to say goodbye to loved ones? Even if she could understand her mother's reasoning to a degree, it wasn't a justification for treating human lives as expendable. To make matters worse, this sacrifice hadn't brought any honor or rewards to the underworld, only brutality and betrayal. With each step, Bronya found herself feeling further and further estranged from the mother she had once trusted unconditionally. More troubling still, as she looked at this city of the dead, she couldn't help but recall the image of Billabong from high above. Would humanity's last fortress one day suffer this same fate? The potential future hidden in this bleak reflection left Bronya uncertain and afraid. Alright, we're here. If I remember correctly, this place used to be a rather well-known private clinic. There should still be plenty of supplies stored inside. A decade was more than enough to make any place unrecognizable, and the building that stood before them was no exception. Being close to the initial point of devastation, its balcony on the second floor had collapsed entirely, the roof tiles were caved in, and even the sign was lying broken and covered in dust. It looked every bit a part of an abandoned ruin. Though Seal had been somewhat suspicious of Venti's knowledge, their trouble-free journey here had reassured her somewhat. Still, she had no interest in what the clinic might have been in the past. No amount of nostalgia would bring her leader or comrades back. With a wordless nod, she lowered her scythe, ready to start clearing the entrance. Chapter 27, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 27. The progress of their digging was steady, but it was going to take a while to get through. After warning them not to wander off and to keep a lookout, Seal paid them no more attention, throwing herself into her work. Finally, it was just Venti and Bronya, with a rare chance to talk about things that weighed on their minds. This place. Bronya hesitated, unsure of where to start, but Venti could tell what she wanted to say. Yet, harsh as it sounded, Bronya's sympathy couldn't change the fact that this place had been lost to the Rift's corruption years ago. Maybe expressing it would make her feel better, but for the families still suffering at the hands of the Rift's monsters, trapped in a living nightmare, her regret offered little solace. Realizing her earlier words had been somewhat naive, Bronya chose not to voice her apology, saying instead, I can see now why you've dedicated yourself to all of this. The people here. They've endured hopelessness that the upper district can't even imagine. And because of that, they've come to long for the beauty spoken of in songs. Her eyes lowered, a sorrowful expression crossing her face. If they were to lose even that little bit of hope, I think everyone would eventually fall apart. I'm glad to hear you recognize the worth of my poetry, but you know, Venti replied gently, the people here aren't as fragile as you might think. The hint of a smile played on his face. They've already been living like this for over a decade. Sure, a decade might seem like a couple of simple words, but for them, living through one bad day after another has been the reality. Down here, resilience isn't rare, it's in almost everyone you meet. Bronya absorbed his words, a thought lingering in her mind. Then, how can I help them? She avoided the meaningless promises, focusing instead on what she could actually do. Venti, ever the wise teacher, responded thoughtfully, well, that's a good question. My advice? Make sure you exercise, study, eat well, rest up, and enjoy life. Someday, when you become a great supreme guardian, you'll be in a position to help everyone. That just sounds like looking after myself, Bronya said, exasperated. Vidi, I genuinely came to you for advice. No need to rush, my friend. You already have the answers, you're just too afraid to face them, so you look to me to tell you what's right. But only by doing what feels right to you can you ever be free from that lingering guilt. Vidi's tone softened. But tell me, have you thought about what you want to achieve in life? My goal? As the heir to the Supreme Guardian, I was trained to dedicate my life to Billabong, to lead the people toward happiness. And do you feel that all that training has prepared you to accomplish this? I'm not sure. I've only seen the light on the surface before, but I never realized how many people live like this, barely surviving, who could have had so much more. Bronya's gaze wandered toward the towering structures at the edge of the town. There was something familiar about them, yet she couldn't quite recall ever being there, and the feeling echoed the uncertainty stirring within her. She murmured softly, almost to herself, sometimes, I wonder if Mother's path might be wrong. Because the weight of the Supreme Guardian's expectations has nothing to do with these people's reality? No. That's not it. My mother, Bronya's face flickered with pain as she spoke of Gokulia, quickly correcting herself. I mean, the Supreme Guardian, she bears a heavy burden, too. She has to make sacrifices for the greater good. So she's forced to choose to sacrifice others? Bronya felt a painful stab in her heart at Venti's words. Defeated, her head bowed, her lips pale and trembling as she struggled to accept the truth. But Venti, instead of pressing on, let out a quiet sigh, as if disappointed not in her, but in the fate that left her so trapped. Bronya, you say you wish to protect everyone, to ensure Billabong survives, to lead its people to happiness. His voice was like a distant breeze, gentle yet persistent. That dream comes from your education and the fierce desire born from seeing the suffering around you. But to me, you're a child bound by the goals others have set for you. Bound to the people behind the walls, whose freedom had been stripped away by snow and the rift's threat. The loss of freedom had been an enduring reality for centuries. As both a Silvermane guard and the heir to the Supreme Guardian, she could never abandon her duties or forget the lives sacrificed to protect Billabong. It was a privileged responsibility she bore, a duty as part of the upper echelon of society. So, how could she ever talk of pursuing her own freedom? Sensing her resistance, Venti gave her a faintly resigned smile. Freedom doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities or running away. That's far too narrow a view. Then what is freedom? Everyone defines freedom differently, it depends on the context. It often involves fighting against unfair circumstances, which is what I think you're missing. The poet's words flowed like a melody. To bring happiness to others, you first need to understand what happiness and suffering mean. That might sound like a platitude, but happiness varies from person to person. Some people find happiness in being with their loved ones. Some think it's having wealth and power beyond measure. And others believe their happiness lies in making others happy. There was something in Venti's clear, gentle gaze that Bronya couldn't quite comprehend. So, what do you think the people of Billabong see as their happiness? Their happiness. The question, so unrelated to their previous conversation, left Bronya stumped. Venti, with an easy grin, merely waited, watching her flustered reaction. Just as Bronya was gathering herself to respond, Seal's voice cut into her thoughts. Hey. I asked you to keep watch, not to sit around chatting. And you're so absorbed in it too, amateurs. She rolled her eyes at the two, handing them each a medical kit with a sigh. One for each of you. Here. Thank you, Venti replied cheerfully, then turned to Bronya, who still looked like she had more to say. With a wink, he said, take your time. The answer will come to you. When you know what makes people happy, I think you'll understand freedom too. Reluctantly, Bronya shouldered her medical kit, setting out with the others to head back. She kept mulling over Venti's words, but no matter how she tried, she couldn't escape the loop his questions had started in her mind. The tension grew until a faint, ethereal music box tune drifted through the air, jolting Bronya back to the present, a chill running down her spine. She had been lost in thought in a place as dangerous as this, a rookie mistake she'd never have made before. Yet somehow, the error left her feeling something indescribable. It was an unsettling feeling, but there was no helping it. She glanced at her two companions, who continued walking ahead, seemingly oblivious to the music box's tune. As Bronya dismissed it as some old, discarded relic and prepared to move on, a frail, childish voice whispered, "Ah, sister." The word halted her in her tracks, and she turned toward the source. At the end of her gaze stood a small house, its light warm and lonely. And then, the voice spoke again, soft and raspy, followed by a faint cough. "Have you abandoned me? Could there still be someone alive here?" Chapter 28, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 28. Bronya could barely believe what she was hearing, A child surviving on the outskirts of a town abandoned to monsters, left desolate for over 10 years? The thought alone filled her with a sorrow she couldn't shake. But more than anything, as she stopped in place, the voice seemed to sense her presence. Ah! Is someone there? Outside the window. She heard a soft rustle of fabric, and it felt as though the child was drawing closer, separated only by a thin pane of glass. My eyes. I can't see anything. Please forgive me if I'm being rude. The voice sounded hesitant, almost pleading. Bronya pressed her lips together, forcing out a gentle reply. It's all right, you don't need to be afraid. I'm right here, just outside the window. Ah. Thank you, stranger. The girl's tone softened slightly. Although this might be sudden, may I ask you something? Of course. If it's something I know, I'll tell you. You're very kind. Just like my sister. The girl paused for a moment, then continued. I want to ask if you've seen someone, a woman with a beautiful voice and a hairband decorated with bells. As if recalling a sweet memory, the girl chuckled softly. The bells make such a lovely sound, clear and gentle. But she quickly grew anxious, realizing she was taking up Bronya's time. She's my sister. She left a long time ago, and hasn't come home. As the girl's words sank in, Bronya felt as though her heart were sinking into a dark, endless void. My sister told me she was going to a place called the Rift. She said she could find valuable things there. The ominous feeling took solid form, pressing down with even greater weight. Bronya couldn't dwell on why these two siblings had stayed here. All she could think about was how to comfort a child who might already have lost her family. Unaware of Bronya's inner turmoil, the girl continued in her frail, endearing voice. If you see my sister, could you tell her to come home soon? Her little sister is waiting for her. All alone. I. Bronya struggled to respond, and the girl waited patiently, as if sensing her distress. At last, after gathering herself, Bronya forced out a promise, her voice laced with bitterness. I'll let her know for you. The girl sighed in relief, her voice trembling slightly with fatigue. Thank you for your kindness. I'll wait here for news. Please, stay safe. The child's concern was something Bronya could hardly bear. She leaned closer to the glass, almost desperate. It's too dangerous here. If you stay, a rift creature could come out but before Bronya could finish, the girl interrupted. I'm sorry. I know you mean well. But I can't leave. Her voice, previously soft and timid, now held a note of resolve. If I leave now, my sister won't be able to find me when she comes back. She'll be all alone. But, truly. I'm so sorry, but this was our promise. Please don't try to change my mind. With that final plea, there was the sound of something being shifted, and then the light dimmed. The girl's voice faded, disappearing into the darkness beyond the glass. Bronya, hoping for one last chance to reach out, was about to call again when, hey. You've been standing there muttering to yourself for a while now, what's up with you? Startled, she turned back to find Seal and Venti waiting for her. Seal shot her an irritated look, while Venti's face was etched with concern. Are you feeling alright? He asked. No, Bronya hesitated, unsure of where to begin. She looked back toward the small house, now devoid of warmth, its window thick with dust, abandoned long ago. Was it just my imagination? Her mind resisted the idea, clinging to the feeling of reality, but it was true that neither of her companions had heard the girl's voice. Nor did they seem like they were playing a prank to scare her. If you're okay, let's get moving. You can rest once we're back at the clinic, Seal said, her expression wary but not questioning further. Venti took a few steps closer, patting her shoulder in comfort. Are you? What now? Seal, impatient, turned back with a questioning look. Even Venti looked at Bronya, expectant, as though she were about to reveal some long-hidden truth. Bronya took a deep breath, her voice steady but somber. I don't quite understand it myself, but I just heard something. A sound? Seal's gaze sharpened, her eyes scanning the ruins around them, especially the darkened areas where monsters might lurk. Finding nothing amiss, she frowned. Don't scare yourself. We're on the outskirts, it's rare for monsters to wander here. And we're following a path our charming guide here picked out for us, right? Doesn't that count for something? Oh, Seal, that hurts. What do you take me for? Venti exclaimed, clutching his chest in mock offense. Seal rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed, but Bronya's mind was elsewhere. Her voice was faint as she tried to explain. No. It wasn't a monster. It was a young girl's voice. Seal's look was skeptical. Venti raised an eyebrow, his expression waiting for her to continue. Bronya pressed her hand to her forehead, searching for the words. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I heard someone. A child. She was talking to me. She asked me to find her sister. to pass along a message. Silence hung heavy for a moment, broken only by Seal's burst of laughter. Ha! I never figured you'd be one for ghost stories. I thought that was more our bard's thing. Wait, am I really that big of a joker in your eyes? Venti chuckled, giving a helpless shrug. As the two started to bicker, Bronya's patience ran out. I'm not joking, and this isn't a ghost story. I truly heard her. So, what's your point? Seal tilted her head, confused as to why Bronya was suddenly so rattled by a tease. After the rift overtook this area a decade ago, no one's lived here, let alone a child. Do you really think a kid could survive here? But Bronya knew Seal was right. It was likely some strange phenomenon brought on by the rift, or perhaps her grief had stirred something. Such occurrences had been reported from time to time on the front lines, soldiers claiming they'd seen Silvermane guards long since lost in battle. But that sorrow had felt so raw and real, far beyond anything an illusion could evoke. Alright, enough with the spooking yourself. We've got people waiting on us back at the clinic, so save the chills for when we're not on the clock. Assuming Bronya was just shaken, Seal sighed and waved her off, heading back without a second thought. Watching her retreating figure, Bronya lowered her head, clenching her fists, torn over whether to let the memory go. Just then, Venti's soft voice broke the silence. Do you want to try finding that girl's sister? Chapter 29, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 29, you really believe me? Bronya couldn't deny the warmth rising in her heart. Since arriving in the underworld and shedding the title of Supreme Guardian's heir, she'd finally seen firsthand that here, her status and authority meant nothing. In this gray world, she was no different from anyone else. No one here bowed to her because of her title, nor did they flatter her with empty words or twist the truth to gain her favor. In fact, if she were to reveal her true identity, it would only put her at a disadvantage. Though she hated to admit it, she felt ashamed for coming here so carelessly, without even a weapon for protection. She'd thought that, despite the poor conditions in the underworld, it would still respect the order imposed by the Supreme Guardian and wouldn't be as dangerous as the front lines. But Rivet Town was even more corrupted than the rift's reach into Billabong, and here, trust was scarce. Even worse, there were groups dedicated to robbing others of their hard-earned possessions. In conversations with Venti's friends, she'd often found herself unable to keep up, and Seal's barbs had often left her feeling defeated. So when Venti extended his support, she couldn't help but feel more than gratitude. She felt an unexpected sense of connection. The young Bronya didn't view this new feeling as romantic, but more as a blend of friendship and camaraderie. With a determined expression, she finally replied, I want to look for her. If someone's managed to survive here, there must be traces left behind. Sisters, living in the rift. I'd love to see how their story unfolds. Let me go with you. Venti said with a grin. Thank you, Venti. No need for thanks, we're good friends, right? Venti's playful smile put her mind at ease. Bronya was grateful for his support and trust. Going alone into this part of the rift would have been dangerous. Not that she was afraid of the risk, she wouldn't have taken Kokolia's assignment to lead her elite team into the perilous front lines otherwise. But the harsh truth was, while her title afforded her many privileges, it also meant that her life wasn't her own. She was responsible for the people of Billabong. If she were to disappear or die here, it could very well lead to an irreversible divide between the upper and lower districts. The weight of this reality prevented her from fully committing to the search. Noticing that Bronya's spirits had lifted somewhat, Venti suggested, in that case, no time to waste. Let's deliver these medical kits first, then we can ask around for information and come back later. Of course, they couldn't break off from the group right now to search for the girl's sister. And anyway, the information they needed might not be here alone. As the underworld's largest settlement, Boulder Town was far more likely to offer leads. Otherwise, by the time they stumbled onto anything useful, Natasha would probably have sent out a search party for them. They'd be adding to her troubles instead of helping in this urgent time. As Bronya hurried to catch up, she was warmed by the sight of Seal waiting, arms crossed, although she wore a grumpy expression. Though Seal still didn't seem particularly friendly, Bronya understood that if Seal truly disliked her, she wouldn't have cared about her safety. By waiting, Seal was showing that she might even see Bronya as someone who, like Venti, was a trusted ally of Wildfire. That made two people who accepted her here. The thought brought a small smile to her face. Seeing her smile, Seal, who had been about to speak, looked away, suddenly flustered. Seal's initial wariness had only been because Bronya's identity seemed suspicious. She'd been trying to test her, hoping to see if she would slip up, not because she had any deep-seated grudge. Back in Boulder Town, Natasha finally exhaled in relief upon receiving the much-needed medical supplies. After thanking everyone for their hard work, she was soon busy again, with Seal stepping in to help as best as she could. As for Venti, Natasha brushed him off with, "You've done plenty for everyone already, go take a break." And since Bronya didn't know Natasha or the others all that well, she also took her leave with Venti. To rest and gather information, Venti brought her to the Gata Hotel in the underworld. It was part of the same chain as the Gata Grand Hotel in the upper district. When Bronya asked the friendly owner about the connection, the woman laughed warmly. "Both the one up there and this one down here belong to the Gata family. Our family's been around since before the Eternal Freeze, and I've heard we even had ties to the original Supreme Guardian, Rand. So there's that kind of history here?" Bronya's curiosity was piqued. Before, she doubted Venti's plan of gathering information in a public place, as most of her own intelligence came from detailed reports prepared by officials like Pela. Coming out to collect intel like this was a first for her. The owner seemed to be in a talkative mood, continuing eagerly. "Yes, indeed. Our family was one of the most prominent back in the day. The Rands are what you'd call a major family these days, right? We were probably on their level back then. I know one of their family members. He's now a Silvermane Guard captain, defending the front lines with great dedication to his family name." Talking about things she was familiar with brought back a bit of the confident, radiant Bronya of old. "Haha. And now you know someone from the Gata family too? We might not have a Supreme Guardian, but we're not far off." The owner joked. Unlike other underworld residents, she seemed to hold no ill will toward the Supreme Guardian and even went on explaining. "But unfortunately, there were a few who squandered the family fortune, and we nearly lost everything. Thankfully, someone took up the family name and built us back up again. This hotel was our comeback. Eventually, business got so good here that someone decided to try their hand at the upper district, and, wouldn't you know it, the Gata family even secured a property in the most luxurious part of the administrative district. And that's how the Gata Grand Hotel up there came to be." "I see." Bronya nodded in understanding. "Our family had to split after that, with one branch staying in each district." At this point, the owner's expression turned a bit wistful. "So do you know Mr. Gata from the upper district? What's he like? I mean, I might be performing there someday. Should I bring him a gift or something to make a good impression?" Venti interjected. "Oh, of course. We're still family, after all," she chuckled. "We still have family gatherings on warm holidays and such. Good times." The owner, Gertie, recalled fondly. "As for that Mr. Gata, he's a good man, don't worry. Just show up as yourself, no need for formalities. And truth be told, we're actually of the same generation." "Haha. Wait. You mean?" Bronya was surprised. Although the owner didn't look particularly young, she certainly didn't seem old enough to be considered in the same generation as the elderly Mr. Gata. She'd met the upper district's Mr. Gata a few times and remembered him as a white-haired elder. Even if one's features aged prematurely, the difference was striking. Noticing her unspoken thoughts, Gertie grinned knowingly. "A lot of people say that. But some things in life, you need to take care of, don't you think?" With a mischievous twinkle, she added, "Would you like some beauty tips, young lady? I can tell you have a good base, you just need to show it off a bit more. Your current methods are decent, but let me tell you, they're a little outdated." Chapter 30, Star Rail, starting with a Lyre, living off Busking, 30. After Gertie pulled Bronya aside to share her beauty tips, Bronya returned to Venti, a little dazed. She found him staring with dismay at his meal, spoon in hand. There was a sticky, unrecognizable bowl of what seemed to be a thick soup, a slab of murky meat jelly with chunks of some unidentifiable meat, and a big bowl of fried rice emitting an unsettling aroma. This looked less like a meal and more like some punishment game prize. "Even I'm not sure I can handle this," Venti muttered. He was, of course, against wasting food, especially in the underworld, where every bit of food was precious, and waste was shameful. Still, well, though he knew better than to judge a dish by its appearance, something about this food just didn't look appetizing. What did you order?" Bronya's expression was one of shared confusion. If even Venti, who frequented the underworld, was reluctant, it was no wonder that Bronya, who had grown up with the best the upper district had to offer, looked apprehensive. "As far as I know, this is something called a vegetable soup, that's rat meat jelly, and this. Well, it's just fried rice." Venti pointed to each dish, looking defeated. Gertie was experimenting with some new dishes and asked for feedback, so I figured I'd try something different. "I see. She certainly has a creative spirit," Bronya murmured, swallowing hard. Without further hesitation, she took a relatively clean spoon and thought about where to start. As someone who disliked waste herself, she had no intention of dismissing the food based on appearance alone. She wasn't that picky. "Let me take care of these for you. I wouldn't want your first visit to be ruined by an overly ambitious meal," or for you to be scared off from ever coming back here to support Gertie," Venti quickly offered. With that, he scooped up a spoonful of fried rice and put it in his mouth. The strange flavors overwhelmed him, and his expression shifted dramatically as he forced himself to swallow with a gulp of soup. Phew. Bronya couldn't help but smile at his reaction. Even though she knew it wasn't nice, a sense of amusement bubbled up within her. Venti, noticing her grin, nudged the menu toward her with a suggestion. "Oh, by the way, here's the regular menu. If you want a more classic underworld experience, I recommend the fried rock crab and the stewed salamander meat in tin can." He'd have loved to recommend something lighter, perhaps more suited to her tastes, but this being the underworld's Kata hotel, options were limited. In the end, Bronya decided against sharing Venti's dishes. While she didn't mind the idea, she couldn't help but worry that, if Venti saw their friendship differently, it might be an overstep. What if he took it the wrong way? The thought alone was enough to make her want to escape back to the upper district. She settled for the fried rock crab and the stewed salamander meat, as he'd suggested. She had actually seen the crab at upper district banquets before, though it hadn't looked like this golden battered version. It was usually arranged delicately as a cold appetizer. The salamander meat came in a tin can that, judging by its dented look, seemed to have been repurposed from some abandoned machinery. At least it was clean, with the can edges wrapped in a crust of bread to prevent burns. Paired with the tender meat inside, it was surprisingly delicious. They ate in relative silence. Bronya, out of habit, ate with a measured, elegant pace. Venti, on the other hand, might have wanted to make a joke about how delicious it was, but with food this challenging, painfully satisfying was more accurate. After finishing the meal, Venti leaned back, stuffed and exhausted, while Bronya dabbed her mouth, maintaining a graceful composure. Their contrasting behavior naturally drew some attention, though no one in the hotel seemed surprised to see Venti in the company of someone refined. Observers looked on with warm smiles at the odd pair. Just then, Gertie bustled over to ask Venti for his thoughts on the new dishes. After giving an honest assessment, especially on the need to rename the rat meat jelly, Venti finally got around to asking about something important. "Sisters living in the rift, you say?" Gertie stowed her grease-stained notebook, frowning thoughtfully. "Well, back in the early days, when Rivet Town first fell, there may have still been people living there. But now? Impossible. Everyone's either moved to Boulder Town or joined small wandering groups. At most, some might have joined that new robot settlement, but otherwise, there's nowhere else to go." "So, you don't recall anything specific about this?" Bronya pressed, her urgency clear. Perhaps seeing the importance of the matter, Gertie thought for a moment longer, then shook her head. "Sorry, I really don't. When Rivet Town fell to the monsters, the impact was devastating. Many people disappeared without a trace, perhaps some did end up left behind." Nearby patrons chimed in with their own input. "Yeah, no one can live there now. Unless you got a death wish, who would make their home in the rift? Besides, if memory serves, there's a constant stream of scavengers there. Anyone staying would come back to find their place stripped clean. The only benefit of staying there is that it's close to Rivet Town, so you can scavenge things to sell in the robot settlement. But good luck spending your earnings if you don't make it back alive." As the conversation drifted toward the robot settlement, Bronya listened carefully, picking up bits of information. When she came across unfamiliar terms, she quietly asked Venti for clarification. "The girl I spoke to said her sister goes to the rift to look for valuables. Since the robot settlement is the largest marketplace around, maybe we can find some clues there." "Sounds like a good lead." "Perfect timing, I've been meaning to head that way myself. Let's make it our fourth stop." Venti grinned. "You actually kept track." Bronya had assumed Venti's intent was simply to show her the realities of the underworld. After witnessing such suffering firsthand, she couldn't imagine leaving things as they were. Whatever Venti planned next, as long as it wasn't an outright rebellion, she would advocate for him and serve as a voice to the Supreme Guardian. To Bronya, it seemed simple. With a heartfelt conversation, her mother could lift the blockade, and that would be the beginning of healing the rift between the upper and lower districts. But Venti, fully aware that change was never so immediate, merely offered her a warm, knowing smile. "Of course. Though every journey must end, we're still on our way. If I were to describe it musically, I'd say we're only halfway through the song."